So we're doing something that no one on the internet has ever done before. It's a fresh, new idea. We're going to talk about the Star Wars prequels.
No one ever, not a single person
Nope,
has ever
no
talked,
one has ever done a retrospective on the Star Wars
which
prequels.
means we're going
And
to
if
have things to say about it that no one else has. We have so many new ideas and perspectives.
if you're thinking, but just yesterday I saw a 10-hour retrospective on the first hour of Attack of the Clones. I don't know if that's a real thing, but I think there's a decent chance that it is. You didn't actually see that. That was just a hallucination. But yeah, so we've been talking about doing something like this for a long time, and for some reason one day Lewis decided he was going to start Star Wars from the very beginning, and so
One day, I
we
started on
decided.
May the 4th, the Star Wars Day.
Okay, fair enough. Um, he was originally going to watch everything Star Wars before we did this, but we realized that video would be 20 hours long, so we decided to break it up into segments in some way. First of all, spoilers. But like, I don't even know why you'd bother if you either don't like. I
Yeah,
don't think anyone's coming around on Star Wars. You either care or you don't.
yeah.
It's
These
over.
movies have existed for 20 years now. Like,
Just you never know. And the other thing is, nominally, this is not going to be about Clone Wars, but invariably, it's going to come up.
yeah, we might do a whole separate video on Clone Wars, but you can't talk about the prequels now without talking about Clone Wars because it made the prequels so much better.
I mean, you can. Let me give a brief summation of the first two prequel, or basically, I guess, Attack of the Clones. No, and Phantom Menace because of Maul. Let me give a summation of both of those movies without Clone Wars.
What was that?
So that was a summation of both of the first two movies without Clone Wars.
You like was did you put on like a robot filter?
No, what did it sound
It
like?
sounded like you went. I really hope the
No,
recording picked that up. You
I did
went.
like a raspberry that was like.
Oh, because it sounded like you went. These are the first. This is the summation of the first two movies of the Clone Wars. Beep, 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 beep. I was like, did you turn into a battle droid? What?
Okay. Anyway, so how do we even like? How do we start this? Like, how do we structure this?
Let's start with the Phantom Menace. That's the trailer I got playing on right now. Playing
All right,
on loop right now.
the Phantom Menace. Uh, Hang on a sec. I need to check something because I thought of this, but now I can't remember the exact wording, and I want to make sure I get it absolutely right. Because the Phantom Menace has like a shocking problem right out of the gate, in my opinion.
Well,
Like,
let's start like this. I always like to give this question to people that like the Phantom Menace or just people that like the prequels in general and like haven't seen it in a while. And we've seen it recently, so maybe we'll have better luck. But what is the Phantom Menace about? Like, just give me a plot summary, the best you can.
well, that's the problem because well, so no, here's the thing that I realized, and I mean I kind of always knew this, but it really hit me on this rewatch, and I haven't watched this movie in like 4 years. I watched it during COVID with my roommate because we were bored, so that was literally 4 years ago, probably almost to the day. So the opening title crawl, so you get the Star Wars, you get the music, everything's good. The first line of the opening crawl: turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. Okay, we're off to a good start. I mean, we don't really know what the Republic is, but it's the start of a new trilogy and a new era, so that's cool. It's good. It sounds active. It sounds exciting. The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute. And right there, you can just felt the momentum just die a little bit. Like, compare that to like the opening crawl of the first of A New Hope, when it's like the evil galactic, or the rebels
The
are
Rebel.
in retreat against the evil galactic empire.
Yeah,
It's so much better. Like,
yeah.
you could just tell like the taxation of trade routes is in dispute, and it's just right there. You just feel a bit of a twinge.
And it
And I
kind
don't
of
know. Maybe if I like had a memory of seeing this for the first time, I wouldn't feel that way. Like, if you're a prequels defender, maybe you're gonna try to convince me that I've been like brain poisoned by the hate memes and stuff. But just look, I'm a huge nerd. I've been spending the past like 2 weeks of my life watching nothing but Suits, for God's sake. But it's just not the same. Like, I don't. I don't want to talk about trade routes.
7 minutes in, by the way. 7 minutes into our Star Wars video, you mentioned
I got a
suits.
suits. I got a
I got
suits
to.
reference.
I was in my before we did this. I was like, okay, at what point is he going to mention suits just for some reason?
Yeah. Besides Star Wars, that dominates all my media consumption over the last week or so. But anyway, no, I just feel like at that point you realize that the movie might have a problem, and it does because like the thing that really, I mean, obviously there's a lot of problems with the Nemoidians, like the racism. That's kind of a problem.
We should not
Um,
have made this bargain.
but they're just so boring. Like they don't look interesting as villains. They look kind of stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like, the value of the intro to A New Hope is how much you get out of it, even though, and I mean, obviously, like, it's not all like super serious. Like, I mean, the first lines are said by the comic relief character, for God's sake. But there's something about it that just draws you in a lot more. In fact, not to turn this into like a OT thing, but I saw an interview that Mark Hamill did where he was talking about how there was like a conversation on the set about introducing Darth Vader and saying like that's the Dark Lord of the Empire or something. And apparently, according to Hamill, Lucas just said it's a guy in all black armor against a white background with white soldiers around him. People will get the point. And it's crazy to me that the person who supposedly at least uttered that sentence then turned around and made this.
Well, I think Lucas, a lot of what he found success in was with the help of other people. Because I've heard through interviews and just background stuff that Lucas actually wanted to incorporate a lot more of like government talk and like Senate, and like there's apparently a cut of A New Hope in the very like early days of the movie where there's another guy that's with Luke and Ben and the droids in Tatooine, and his whole point is like to talk about the Senate and to like get Luke informed about like the government ongoings in the galaxy, like to give you like background. And I think somebody just told Lucas just like cut him out of the entire movie. He adds nothing, and it feels like no one was there to do that for the prequel movies.
Yes, that's true. And we'll get to the politics. I guess we'll just kind of go through the movie like kind of flow wise. Like the beginning has some like okay stuff. I mean, again, the Nemoidians to me just they don't come off as engaging villain. I mean, obviously, look, the point is that they're cowards and they're being bullied by this like dark hooded figure to do all like to take on all the risk and essentially get very little of the reward because he knows that they're gonna kill him. You know, the Sith are gonna kill them if they don't do exactly what they say. I get that. But to me, when you have this combination of like the Trade Federation's mission is boring, the Trade Federation is boring. I mean, at this point, I guess you can kind of make the case that you don't know that the battle droids are absolute fodder, but the battle droids are functional in their design of they look like kind of cheap foot soldiers, and they're definitely funny. But I think you can look at those things and quickly intuit that they are not like the top billing, scary fist of victory like stormtroopers are or the clone army is or you know whatever. I think that that's an important detail. So like that's the thing that really stuck out to me about the opening is like yeah there's action but essentially until the droidicas show up, and again maybe this is just because like I'm a longtime fan, I know how everything plays out, like there's just not a lot of good tension in the opening sequence until the droidicas show up and you realize that like they actually do have some robots that can be a challenge for the Jedi. And then well okay, do you have anything else you want to say about like the opening, because then I've got to get into one of the main things I noticed on this rewatch.
Before we get super into like what happens, just try your best to give me like a log line of what this movie is about, like a 2 sentence plot summary to get like what they usually do to like get people to watch the film. Like, I just want to know what your log line would be.
The movie is about how Anakin is introduced to the Jedi. It's just not very clear about that fact.
Yeah, so it's funny because that's probably the best way to explain it, even though Anakin doesn't appear until like 30-40 minutes in. Like, it's crazy because when you say another thing I like to ask people about this movie is who is the main character. I think the closest we can get to is Qui-Gon, but that's not
which
what.
is it's bad.
Which is not, but that's not who the movie's about. The movie's about Anakin, right? Even though he doesn't really appear until 40 minutes in. So he kind of can't be the main character, even though the movie's supposed to be about him, because it's the whole thing. All the prequels are about introducing Anakin's character before he becomes Darth Vader. But the most suitable answer we have is Qui-Gon, but that doesn't really feel like it works, because there's entire scenes where he's not in it, like with Obi-Wan kind of being the center. It just doesn't really follow any kind of sense. Like, so for instance, A New Hope, it follows beat by beat the traditional story structure, the hero's journey. You know, and it does this almost to the point where it's created this structure for movies to come because it follows it so closely. It's the example everybody uses when they're talking about how you should set up your script and how you should set up your movie. Opening image, the theme stated, the setup, the catalyst, and there's points later on where it's like the bad guys close in, the midpoint, the climax, and it when you look at the Phantom Menace and you line it up with this story structure, it follows none of these. And I'm not saying that every movie has to follow this structure like to the letter, but I find it interesting because it doesn't really follow anything. Like other movies that like to go off and do their own thing with their script and the way they structure their movie, they still find some kind of pace to make you engage. Whereas I am not kidding when I say this. When I watched this a few weeks ago on Star Wars Day, I fell asleep 10 minutes in and I woke up like 30 minutes into the movie. I literally fell asleep on my couch. And I have a kid. I was watching my kid while watching this movie, and I still couldn't stay awake. It's really boring. There's not much to engage you up until, like... And even though he's annoying as hell, Jar Jar is, like, the most energetic thing in the movie. So when that's your, like, draw, it's really hard to engage with anything. Even the moments of the movie that are good. And there are good moments in this movie. I want to make clear that I actually do like this movie, even though it's not good. And I think you do too, right?
Yeah, I think that would be a fair assessment, especially after this rewatch. To be perfectly honest, I came out of rewatching it this time feeling a little more generous to it than
I did
have in
too.
the past. A bit.
But it also reaffirmed all the things I don't like about it, which is that it's just bland. It's even compared to the other two, it's bland and boring. Not all the way through. There are especially the end of the movie is actually like incredibly well done, which is really crazy when you think about the rest of the movie. And
Well, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But the beginning does nothing to keep you focused. I honestly don't know as a kid what maybe it's just because I saw laser swords and it was easier for me to look at it was easier for me to look at fun visuals on screen and not pay attention to the droning, boring trade crap. But it's so hard to get engaged with this movie like how it engaged me when I was a kid, which is sad, but also kind of interesting.
So while you were saying that, I just went, because I was curious about this, because I thought maybe we were being a little too harsh about the structure issues, because, to be fair, Luke does not start out as the point of view character in the original. So I just scrubbed through Phantom Menace and A New Hope on Disney Plus real quick, to ballpark when you first meet the two main characters. You meet Luke about 16 minutes into A New Hope. Again, ballpark. I glanced at this for like a second.
Mm-hmm.
You meet Anakin like 33 minutes into Phantom Menace.
Right, yeah.
That's like a little bit is okay. And I'm not saying look, I'm going to be honest. If Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace had ended the opening title crawl panned down on Tatooine and you had seen 9-year-old Anakin like fixing a droid, I feel like some people might have found a way to take issue with that too, given how mean some people have been about Kid Anakin and that actor ever since the movie started. I'm not necessarily saying that's what you have to do, but there comes a point where the setup to the main character, like, you can't spend that much of the movie just setting the stage for them. You have to actually get to them and, like, find a good way to integrate them into the story. So that would be something like if you told me I was like remaking the Phantom Menace, but I could destroy the whole thing. I just had to make like structure changes to try to make it better. Finding a way to either cut that time or to kind of split the difference where you're following like two stories at once, and then the kind of one of the key points in the movie is them intersecting, like something like that. Because yeah, it's really hard to tell what the movie's about, and every character in the movie, to your point about like Jar Jar being like having the most energy, like every character in the movie has some like kind of excuse not to be energetic. Like Qui-Gon is a very stoic person, but yet somehow he's also like got this deep sense of rebellion in him.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan is supposedly young and headstrong, but is constantly a stick in the mud. And so his characterization in the movie, it really hit me how kind of weak it was. Like, he's supposed to be young and headstrong, but his headstrongness is, you should follow the rules sometimes. Um, Padme is constantly under stress
And a
because her
pedophile.
planet's been invaded. What?
And a pedophile.
Okay, is constantly under stress because her planet is getting invaded. The captain, is constantly belly aching about her safety. Shmi is a slave single mother. Anakin's the only other one who shows any, juice at all, really. Which, by the way, but I want to tackle something. Do you want to know who came out from this movie? And I thought I had never really come to peace with how bad the performance was. Natalie Portman sucks. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's her fault. Like, she is just given nothing to do for most of the movie except be a wet blanket on the plan that's going to try to save her planet. She's like, I don't approve of this. This is most unorthodox. It's like, I'm not hearing you come up with any better ideas. Like, you're just sitting there telling Qui-Gon you can't go to the junk dealer. You can't bet on this kid. You can't bet the ship. What are you doing to help your planet? You gonna wish the parts out of the sky? Like, she was just like such a vampire on fun throughout the movie. And then she has like the big twist where she's not the handmaiden, she's the queen, which is like whatever. But even her like delivery there is not great. She's like, I ask you to help us. No, I beg you to help
Oh,
us.
yeah.
It
That
just
delivery was
like,
awful.
and she gets a lot better. Like the second movie, there were still some times where I was like, yeah, but again, not much to work with. By the third movie, I mean, she's knocking it out of the park with Anakin's turn to the dark side and stuff. But in this movie, I hadn't really hit me before, but she is just a black hole of energy throughout the entire film. Even the beginning, like the whole again, she's given this boring dialogue, and she herself is not selling it. Like there are actors who are trying to sell stuff. Like we'll get to the other movies later, but like there are some things that Christopher Lee is forced to say that when you think about them are kind of stupid, but Christopher Lee is selling it like he's got this grand plan and he's this dignified guy. He's selling it. Natalie Portman in The Phantom Menace is not selling anything.
Yeah. Let's take a step back and let's talk about some things that we actually do like about the movie, because we've been kind of shitting on it for about 20 minutes now.
Oh, there's so much more to go.
No,
I
I
haven't
know.
even gotten to Jar Jar yet.
I know. We'll get back to that. I think we should take a little bit of time talking about some of the things we do like about this movie, because there are some things I do like about this movie. A lot of it is not. It's funny because this is going to be another turd I'm tossing in the pile. A lot of the things I like about this movie aren't because I think they're good. This last watch, I've gained an appreciation for the silliness of the movie. Like, there are some hilariously bad lines and some hilariously bad over the top, energetic but still bad performances, like Jar Jar and just how annoying he is. But like, some of the things are so boring that they're hilarious, and I think part of this has to do with the fact that what actually got me wanting to watch this movie again was I watched a stream of people trying to recite the script while progressively getting more and more drunk. And it was just really funny to hear these people word for word say these stupid, crazy lines and then if they messed them up or if they couldn't remember them, get more drunk and then have to drunkenly say these lines, because if you kind of take the fanboy out of it, like obviously I love Star Wars and I like Star Wars more when it's well made, when it's taken seriously and something that you can really get sucked into and enjoy. But if you watch this movie in particular and kind of Attack of the Clones as well, if you watch those movies and kind of just like let the silliness wash over you, it's really enjoyable. Some of the crazy like dumb lines like Boss Nass doing the thing. It's
Oh my
so
God.
stupid.
It is.
And really if you're watching the movie and trying to take it seriously, it's not going to be something you enjoy. But if you're just watching them, if you're just trying to enjoy yourself, like watching that happen, hearing the thing, like the silly fucking things they say, like the Yusa, the Bisa, the Binks, just saying shit with the inflections. I enjoy it because I think it's silly and hilarious. I don't think I enjoy it for the same reasons that the diehard fans of these movies do.
No, I agree 100%. And to your point about like Boss Nass and this stuff, one of the things that really kind of struck me, and don't think I'm the first person to say this, is like, I mean, obviously one of the things to appreciate about this movie is for its time, like, it is a technical marvel for its time. Like, the technology in it was quite impressive then, and a lot of it, let me put it this way, the things that were good before are still decent. The things that looked kind of bad still look bad, look even worse, because, time has progressed. But I do think this movie does kind of shine, like, not to get into like a more contemporary movie thing, but like I think this movie was like it's nostalgic to me from like an effect standpoint for the same reason that like the original, like the first couple Transformers movies that are nostalgic for me from an effect standpoint, is because like I feel like now, because everyone's overworked and underpaid and over budget and everything, like people with CG are in a position, like visual effects stuff, it's in a position where you look like, are these people trying to sell me on this? With CG in like the late 90s and like through the 2000s, even if the CG was bad, if something had a big enough budget, you can look at it and like kind of say like, okay, these people are trying to convince me that this all exists. But the reason I'm talking about this is because it really kind of hit me on this rewatch of this movie, like, it seemed to me like Lucas was so focused on that aspect of it that the other aspects just simply kind of fell through. Like, why? And again, prequel, like diehard prequel fans love to act like every like frame of this movie is like Shakespearean. For why did Boss Nass have that? Like, why did Boss Nass do that stuff? If you ask a super fan of the prequels, they'll be like, well, actually, it's based off this ancient Chinese tradition about an underwater creature, yak yak, or something. I don't care. To me, it was Lucas spent a bunch of time being like, hey, I want you, like all of you, spend all your time making this character look as realistic as possible. Oh, what's he like? I'm just going to make him do some goofy stuff. That'll be his personality. Like, that's really genuinely to me what I feel like the process was. Like, so much energy went into the technical aspect of it that a lot of the other elements that are quintessentially part of a film seem to just not get kind of the eyes they needed. Because the truth is, and I mean, I feel this way about Attacking the Clones too, there are a lot of things in this movie that I would say are like halfway to being good, but aren't.
Yeah.
Again, like the entire, like for example, I think you can see throughout the movie, like everyone talks about the politics and stuff like that. But one of the things that I sort of realized is like, I almost feel like if they leaned into the politics a little more, it somehow would have been better, because the political elements that are like core to the story leave like no impact. But I wondered if maybe if you spent a little more time on them, could you have like built a connection to the situation? And the best example I can think of to jump ahead through the movie a little bit here is like Padme is convinced within 30 seconds to go along with Palpatine's plan to overthrow the current government essentially, or like the current president. And to me, like if they had spent more time showing the fact that the political system was fractured and that people were suffering while it was happening, I feel like maybe the politics could have actually left an impression, but that doesn't happen. You are told that there are people are starving on Naboo. You are told that the government sucks and is inefficient and won't help. And then based on all that information that you are just told by the characters saying it, Padme stands up and kicks like Palpatine's whole plan into motion. And looking back, I was like, man, if they had wanted, if Lucas wanted to make like good political commentary, maybe he could have. I don't know, but like maybe he could have. But you can't. We've talked about this with other things. We talked about this with the sequel trilogy and with like Game of Thrones. We talked about this all the time when we talk about this. Like you can't touch on every single topic in one movie or even a couple of movies or a TV show or whatever and expect to do all of your topics justice. It's just not going to happen. And so I feel like all like the technology is really impressive for its time. And that got so much focus that all of the other things were kind of just jammed together with duct tape. And it comes off in the way the movie works because it is just it's really dumb.
Yeah. So
also pod racing is cool. I like pod racing.
So yeah, okay. One thing that I think is the best part about this movie, and honestly the best part about the entire prequel trilogy, hands down, is the soundtrack. The music in the prequels at times convinces me that I'm actually watching a masterpiece of a movie. Like the Duel of Fates music at the end with Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Maul. The music at the end of Attack of the Clones. Most of the music throughout Revenge of the Sith, pretty much the music the entire way through, is all incredible. And obviously it's because it's, John Williams, the same guy that did the original trilogy, famous composer who's done so many things. He's always great in whatever he does. But there are times where nothing is happening on screen and the music is going crazy, and I don't realize that nothing is happening on screen because of how good the music is. That is, to me, the best part about the entire prequel trilogy. And that is still in effect here. Something else I like about the Phantom Menace specifically, there are like a few lines, there's a few like moments that I think are actually really well done. The line where Anakin talks about him thinking that Qui-Gon is a Jedi, and he says, he thinks that he's there to free the slaves, and he's like, why else would a Jedi be here? And Qui-Gon says, maybe, he's like, you have a lightsaber, and Qui-Gon says, maybe I killed a Jedi and took it off of him. And Anakin says, I don't think that's true. Jedi can't die. And Qui-Gon says, I wish that were true. That's a really nice moment of foreshadowing for Qui-Gon's fate later in the movie. And it's also just, I think, a really great bit of, like, character exposition for Anakin learning about being a Jedi, that being a thing he wants to be. Skipping ahead to the end of the movie.
Well, really quick, can I jump in on Anakin?
Sure.
Because I shat on Natalie Portman's acting in this movie, but I will say, I've never been one of those people who made that tried to make that person's life hell for this performance. Like, it came off better this time than I remember feeling about it. Like, yeah, it's sometimes kind of stilted,
You mean
and
Anakin?
yeah, Anakin, and yeah, not all the lines are exactly home runs, and yeah, he says yippee, and it's
Yippee!
kind of goofy. But like I do think that as far as kids go, like the challenge I think with kids in a lot of movies is trying to use them as vehicles for plot and theme while also making them seem like real kids. And Anakin, maybe he's a bit too nice sometimes, but I mean he's not like Charlie Bucket from the Depp, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Like he's not Jesus. I mean, Anakin literally is Jesus. But anyway, point he there was sort of a genuineness to his performance and to the character that I really came to appreciate, because I mean, yeah, this is kind of I think what he would be like. Like he's grown up in a tough life. So he's a bit cooler headed than your average kid. Like, he confronts Sebulba in a way that no real 9-year-old ever would, but he's, a street kid, a little bit. So he's kind of got that going for him. He's smart. and he tinkers, and all that stuff kind of makes you understand that even beyond his chosen oneness, like he wouldn't be your typical kid because he's smarter than your typical kid, and he's built character with the challenges of his life, and I think a lot of that comes through. Like I like, all the stuff in that scene you're talking about is great. And then I love the stuff that, like, the conversations that Shmi and Qui-Gon have about him actually stood out to me as something that was really nice. Talking about how just what a nice kid he is, and how he was like meant to be in this situation and stuff like that. I thought that stuff came off pretty well, because they do build the idea of a kid who is pretty innocent right now, as innocent as you can be in his situation, and that makes it much more interesting, I think, in the following movies when you see that despite the Jedi, kind of being a certain, the way the Jedi are, the Jedi end up kind of ruining his innocence in a way. Like he's actually got a good heart, but Jedi training actually ends up kind of taking that in the wrong direction. So I was much more impressed with Anakin this time than in the past. His performance stuck out to me a lot.
Yeah, I've always thought that comparatively to like other kids' performances in other movies, especially with the amount of screen time and focus he had, that he actually was one of the standout performances. He had some silly lines. All of them did. They all had silly lines. But given what he had, and like I always actually really enjoyed, I can't remember his name, but the kid's performance as Anakin, and I thought he was one of the other points in the movie that had that energy that kind of kept me engaged. Something else that I noticed about Qui-Gon and Shmi, there was a little bit of like a romantic tension there on this watch for me. There was
Yeah,
there
no,
was there was
I've
like
noticed
something
that before.
there.
There's a bit there.
There was a little something there. Qui-Gon was
Yeah.
like, who's the father? And she's like, there wasn't one. And there was almost like this kind of like, oh, I could be the father sense from Qui-Gon.
Well, no, I think his sense was, holy shit, this kid definitely is the chosen one because he was, you know, born by the midichlorians. Oh
Yeah,
shit.
because I fucking.
Wait,
Okay, here we go.
do we have to do that?
To talk about metachlorians,
Yeah.
we probably should, because it's like the worst, the thing I hate about this movie the most.
All right. Midichlorians are they're totally okay. They're not good. They're not that bad. They're just totally a thing.
They're
That's fine.
bad. They're very
Yeah,
bad.
no, it's fine.
When you take Ben Kenobi in A New Hope's explanation of the Force, where he talks about it's a mystical energy that surrounds us, that penetrates us, it almost feels like anybody could use the Force, the way he gives off that explanation. You just have to know how. You have to trust your instincts. You have to believe, essentially. You have to have faith in this hokey religion, as what's his name on the Death Star said. But when you hear about how you can measure a person's like connection with the Force based on like blood cells and a number given, it really takes the magic and the mysticism out of the Force. Especially, you go from thinking like I could be a Jedi, anyone could be a Jedi if they were just had the training and they believed in themselves and their instincts and who they are, to like a doctor's office visit, like, hey doctor, do I have the Force? Like that's how it feels. And there's an argument that I heard once that was basically like, well, that is a reflection of how the Jedi Order has lost its way in the prequels. That instead of being connected with the Force through nature and through meditation and training, they just measure their blood to see their likelihood to being connected to the Force through like technology, and that is a reflection of the Jedi in that current state and at that time being kind of like a shell of what their ancient tradition is, what they're supposed to represent with their tradition of being a Jedi. And I can see that, especially now with hindsight, and when we look back on the prequels, how we're supposed to know that the Council wasn't right about everything. The Clone Wars really drive that home a lot. Again, Clone Wars really fill in a lot of blanks that the prequels left out. But to me, I never ever until I looked at the prequels under a microscope, I never just on casual watches got the impression that the Jedi Order had lost their way. I get that Qui-Gon was supposed to be kind of rebellious within the Order and didn't go along with everything they say. But when you look at a story that's supposed to be like, here are the heroes and here are the villains, and you have such a clear sense of wrong in the guys holding the red lightsabers and the dark side of the Force, it's kind of lost on me and I think a lot of viewers for a long time that the council was not supposed to be looked at as like the pinnacle of purity and good, and that especially is kind of lost on the kids when the way that you market Star Wars to the kids with the toys is that the Jedi are good, the Jedi are righteous and just and everything that represents justice and peace in the galaxy, and the Sith are dark, evil, want to kill everyone, dominate everything, have sex, unlike the Jedi. But
Okay, where the crap did that come from?
it's just a joke. I never really got the impression that what the prequels were trying to drive home was that the Jedi Council had lost its way in the way of the Jedi, literally right up until Revenge of the Sith. There was nothing in Attack of the Clones or The Phantom Menace, to me, that suggested that within their storytelling, they're showing you that the Jedi of the current modern day had lost their way. To me, they were just representing what good was supposed to be, and so that's my long-winded way of saying I don't buy that explanation for midichlorians, like that it's supposed to be a bad thing, like in a representation of the Jedi losing their way and not being who they're supposed to be.
Okay, let me put a pin in the midichlorians thing for a second, because you said two things I wanted to talk about. First of all, the kind of going deeper into the fact that the Jedi of the prequel trilogy were flawed. Man, if only another Star Wars movie had done that, one that a bunch of people shouted down and terrible arguments for why it's bad. That'd be really dumb. Anyway, the other thing I was going to say to your point, like to that point though, is I would say things like not believing the Sith are back, like fall under the umbrella of should be kind of warning signs that the Jedi that they don't have it. That kind of stuff, but we have to get through midichlorians, and I have to do my midichlorians thing here. Like the thing to me is midichlorians to me, and you and I have argued about this ad nauseum over a certain debate we once had. Midichlorians to me don't break any of that, because just like with any other function that you would kind of do with this process of, you have a group of people that have this select ability that not everyone has access to, or like you have these exceptional people, right? Like being a Jedi is no different to me in this situation than being a pro athlete. Theoretically, anyone, quote unquote, can do it, but there is a function by which people will have a much easier time of it than most others will. There are some rare few people who have a natural disposition towards something that other people won't. Now, that doesn't mean that no one who doesn't have that disposition of, that natural ability can't be successful. But every once in a while, a freak genius comes along, or a freak athlete comes along, or a, whatever comes along in the world, and those people exist, and that's just simply establishing what Anakin is as a function of what he's the chosen one. So, I mean, I don't think midichlorians need to exist by any stretch, but to me, they don't deconstruct the universe. They're simply a measure of Anakin's innate potential. And Anakin, indisputably, the midichlorians are correct, had the most innate potential of any Force user in the history of ever. And to me, nothing about that really says much, except that Anakin had incredible natural talent.
Yeah, but they could have shown and not told.
I guess that's true. I guess that's true. I don't necessarily feel like, and the other thing too, I will say is I heard someone today make the argument that like midichlorians aren't actually like midichlorians might be okay, but it just creates more questions than answers. And to me, like if you're introducing like a scientific component that expands the questions, you can't then turn around and be like, oh, it's making us ask more questions, but it's also destroying the mysticism. Like those two things seem like they're opposites. Like if you're being prompted to ask more questions and think about things in new angles, that enlarges the view of it to me. It doesn't diminish it simply because there's a blood test. Like they still don't understand so many things about the Force. They just understand that biologically creatures like the ability to commune with it is part of biology. So what? I don't care.
Well, to
It
me,
doesn't move the needle for me at all.
the less you know about the Force, the better. Like when you're in the original trilogy when they're explaining the Force in a very vague, like mystical way, that intrigues me more because I don't want to know. I don't want to know really where the Force comes from because I think the more it's explained, I don't think there is a sufficient explanation with something that granular. Apparently, this I don't remember where I read this or where I heard this, but there was someone who was close to George Lucas that he had told his plan for a sequel trilogy if he ever was going to do one. He was going to reveal that the Force was given to everybody by these higher beings that existed in space.
Yep, the wills.
That sounds awful. That is terrible. Not only is that an insufficient explanation, that's a garbage one. You could have said it was God, and I would have liked that more. Like the Christian God, I would have liked that more than
Well, I mean,
these.
well, to that point, I want to jump in on something really quick on this because, like, and honestly, you can cut this if you want. But you and I have talked before about opinions on important issues like religion and philosophy and stuff. And this to me echoes the thing that I've always said to you about evolution, which is I've never understood why people feel like there's some disconnect between the existence of a god and the fact that evolution happens. Because everything else that happens in the universe that is demonstrated as like a function of biology or physics or whatever, people who believe in a god are totally willing to like embrace all that stuff. Again, we're not alive just because of a god. We're alive because we have life juice flowing through our entire body, pumped by a muscle in our chest. Like that's fine, but you draw the line at evolution. And the same thing applies here. Like the existence of a way for humans to understand the grand complexity of the universe doesn't mean that there isn't a grand complexity and doesn't to me affect the wonder that one can feel at the existence of something so grand and complex.
I get that, but specifically for me, just from a narrative standpoint, just like me experiencing a world, the less I know about the Force in Star Wars, the more interesting it is to me because every explanation that isn't ambiguous that tries to get down to the scientific method of the Force isn't sufficient to me. It takes away some of the awe. And Metachlorians, the reason why they do that for me is because I like the idea that anyone anywhere can use the Force. Even if there's someone that's more naturally gifted towards the Force and just has an easier time connecting to it, I still like the idea that anyone, through teaching and through discipline or through just belief in oneself, can reach the levels of those people that are quote unquote naturally gifted. It gives me Metachlorians almost gave me a sense of like, oh, Anakin is like the royal family of the Force in this sense. Like literally from the fact that he was born of the Force, I guess, or whatever the explanation is as to why he doesn't have a dad. To me, it I don't like that in Star Wars, or at least when it comes to something magical and mystical like the Force. I don't like the idea that there's like a royal family of Force users that are just better than other Force users. Part of the reason why I like Rey, we'll get to that later. Wow, actually, I guess this doesn't apply to her anymore because of.
I was gonna say this is the big problem with the.
You know what? You know what? I'm not gonna finish that thought. But essentially,
Point taken.
there are other characters that do exist in Star Wars that aren't like born of some massive like royal blood that are strong, and I like the idea that those characters got to that place because of belief in themselves and because of working hard and trusting their instincts and their talents, and not because they just have better blood. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair.
That to me is not interesting, and it takes away a lot of the things that I like about the Force.
That's fair. We should get off midichlorians because we've still got so much to do. I'm gonna fire some quick shots, and then we'll see which ones take, or if you have any. The deal between Qui-Gon and Watto is needlessly complicated and shittily written, to the point that as a child I never really even understood what the wager was, other than I want Anakin to win.
I still don't understand the wager.
I understand it perfectly now that I'm an adult.
Watto gets the winnings and everything else except for the cost of the ship, and he was upset about that.
Well, he also lost Anakin.
Yeah, but like I don't.
And he also doesn't get the ship.
Right, but he got the winnings, and they were talking about how the winnings would give you more than enough of what you needed for the ship when they were proposing the idea.
Well, yeah, but so Watto, if Watto won, he would get all the money anyway, and the ship, and keep Anakin. Now he gets money, but loses a ship and Anakin.
Yeah, but Qui-Gon presented a scenario...
I agree with you. His being upset is kind of dumb, but I understand the bet now.
Yeah, I guess, but it to me, I don't understand why he was upset, or because Qui-Gon basically presented a scenario where he wouldn't lose. Scenario.
He's also an asshole. That's an important you can't underrate that distinction.
I also fucking love his character. He's so ridiculous.
I wonder, I'd like to know if the expansion explained why, are Toydarians immune to Jedi mind tricks?
It's an allegory for a Jewish person. Mind tricks don't work on him, only money. Did you ever catch that?
Again, no, this is more evidence of my earlier point that George was just he was so focused on making cool-looking robots and cool-looking planets, and he was like, what do the characters want to be? These ones are Asian, these ones are Jewish, these ones are Jamaican. Done. Done. Now let me play with my robots. Get the fuck out of my office.
It's so funny because I feel like the boring characters are boring, and the most energetic and engaging characters are just racist.
Yeah, they're all charged up by the power. They're charged up with a battery of racial stereotypes. Also, so I have a few more just quick notes here. Anakin building C-3PO is dumb, but not because of why didn't he ever recognize him? I don't care about that. Why was he building a protocol droid for his mother? What was he ever going to do? Was she welcoming a lot of dignitaries? Was she needing to serve food to a lot of house guests? Was she needing to translate on build a droid that does dishes? C-3PO has
what his goal
protocol
was.
Protocol droids have no dexterity.
Yeah, I don't know.
C-3PO's arms can barely hold something. What is he gonna do? Is he gonna fix up the house? This guy, you put him on a step ladder, he would probably piss his robot pants. I don't get it.
This is actually something I noticed today while watching Revenge of the Sith. You know how Padme passes out during their fight, and then when they're done, Obi-Wan comes back and C-3PO and R2 are saying...
Yes, he says, we got her on the ship.
Yeah,
How? How? Did R2 drag her? C-3PO, I've never seen C-3PO lift anything heavier than a comlink. No, I noticed that too, actually. That's really funny, because, I never thought about that.
But, I remember him saying he was building C-3PO to help his mom around the house, so I guess there's...
Yeah, he does say that, but I don't know what help, again. She welcoming a lot of house... the 3 people visiting her house were the first visitors it seemed like they might have ever had.
Yeah.
I don't get that. The pod racing is awesome. If you want to be an asshole, you can argue that the sequence goes on way too long and serves its narrative purpose if it had been like much shorter. But again, I think Lucas was just showing off technology there. And to be fair, the tension of the scene like remains throughout. Like you honestly could have made like a Star Wars like mini series for Disney Plus that's just about like a pod race or like pod racing, like a sports movie about pod racing. Hell, I would watch that.
I love the announcers. How one of them was like the local language, and the other was like Galactic Basic English,
Yeah,
as they call
yeah, I thought that was
it.
funny. Also, I understand that this is a lawless place. The fact that there are Tusken Raiders sniping at the drivers and no one clear like imagine if all of the drivers got killed by Tusken Raiders and no one finished the race. That would be like obviously these people are like bloodthirsty maniacs because this sport is really violent anyway and super dangerous. But if no one won the race because like it's like what happened in Iron Man 2. Like imagine if you were really if imagine if you had money on the race in Iron Man 2 and the entire race gets shut down because some like terrorist tries to attack one of the drivers on the track. I'd be like, "What the hell? My parlay depended on that." Anyway, we're getting off track. Um what Jar Jar being promoted to general is stupid.
Yeah.
And he is such a dumbass during that fight. Like one of my favorite dumb moments in the film is when they're lining up against the droids and Jar Jar just turns around and he's like, "Steady, steady." It's like, "Look at you, man. You helped. You did the military general thing. You gave some generic ass order that meant nothing because everyone was already standing there anyway."
And he gave up like the moment that he was like, "Come on, Jar Jar, we don't give up or we don't surrender." And he goes, "We surrender."
That was so funny. Which okay, so as we're kind of getting towards the ending, like the closing sequences of Phantom Menace, I have a theory for you. I don't know if maybe you've always known this, maybe you've never thought of it.
Okay.
Did Qui-Gon know or slash sense that putting Anakin in the cockpit was going to be essential to him winning or to like them winning the day?
You could, I guess, you could make an argument that that was the case. I never got that impression, not a single time, even this
Like
last time.
I have no evidence for it, but it just feels like something he might do.
Qui Gon said, "I'm gonna stay in this cockpit, so that's what I'm gonna do." As he's in like a literal Star War.
Yep. But like the fact that cuz functionally, I guess the core part of that is like if you're not planning that, why bring him anyway? Leave him leave him in the forest. Tell him, "Hey, buddy, you wait in the Gungan village with the Gungan children, which I assume exist. We'll come back and get you when we're done winning the war." If the Force wasn't telling you, "Hey, you should probably bring this kid. He's going to be important," then why would you do it?
Well, see, I think that it was just something that George didn't really think about fully while writing the script. You could go back, like I think he would gladly take that explanation and be like, "Oh yeah, that's definitely what I was going for this whole time." But I think while writing the script, I think he was just trying to come up with a way to get Anakin in that cockpit so he could save the day that way.
Yeah. Also, I got to be honest. All those other pilots, they should be embarrassed. I'm just gonna say it. If a 9 year if just imagine imagine if like in World War II there was a 9 year old pilot that was better than all the Air Force pilots. That would be the most humiliating thing ever.
I mean, Naboo's
Like
army is just ineffective as fuck, anyways.
I get it, but like there's no 9 year old that would be better than like police because that's kind of what those people are. They're like space
The
police
Gungans
essentially.
put up a bigger fight than Naboo did. The Gungans.
That's true. It did take. I feel bad for the Gungans though. Like, hey, congratulations, you've just joined our new alliance. By the way, you're the diversion.
Yeah, you're the ones gonna take the hits.
Yeah, all the tanks, they're coming right for you, Bucko.
So
So that really hit me as something that I thought was funny. Is like the Gungans, I appreciate their sort of honor, and I did think the scene was kind of cool where, not that Padme had a good character arc at all, but the idea that she would have to come around to essentially kissing this guy's ass to get their help to win. I thought that was like, again, besides the acting, I thought that was kind of a compelling idea moment that like all you got to do is just like be super like brown nosing with him and he'll help you and they will like go fight and die with honor. I thought that was all right.
Yeah, I could not get over how terribly delivered that performance was in that moment. Like, I remember watching it recently and her revealing herself to be the queen, basically no one reacting in a way that was like at all realistic, and then her like dead in the face staring down Boss Nass in this most cardboard cutout fucking delivery of basically saying of someone who's supposed to be begging for someone's help. It looked like she was reading off of a teleprompt.
Yeah,
Like
not great.
it was.
We'll be nicer, like so. We'll be nicer to Natalie Portman later,
Oh
but
no,
not great.
I'm not saying it
Yeah,
was her fault. I think a lot of this was the direction.
yeah, that's also
Lucas.
true. I also have one more thing I need to say about Jar Jar, and then we can start to kind of wrap up the Phantom Menace portion
Well,
of this.
I want to cover the Duel of Fates after you're done with
Yeah,
that.
that's I think the last thing we should really hit on.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say about Jar Jar though is I feel like Jar Jar would be would not much. Jar Jar would be a little more tolerable if it wasn't for the bongo scene. Because the bongo scene, he just hijacks the whole movie for that scene. Just entirely stops the movie dead by constantly doing his dumb lines and constantly everything and every possible sign of danger.
The
Like it
bongo
didn't really
scene?
hit me why Jar Jar annoyed me so much until that scene because that scene he is like the focal point character. He's constantly talking throughout that entire sequence and it drove me crazy. Most of the other times because he's just like a line or two or a joke here or there, it's not that bad.
What's the bongo
Eh,
scene?
when they're in the underwater thing when they leave the city
Oh
and
yeah,
they go
yeah.
through and the always a bigger fish scene which is still a funny
Oh
line.
yeah, he talks
um
so much in that
yeah,
scene.
he's talking literally like almost that entire scene and that was the scene that made me like realize like this is the one that puts me over the edge. The rest of the movie he's in it less, he talks less, it's less bad. And like occasionally it's kind of funny. Like as far as if you maybe you don't just like don't want slapstick in Star Wars, but the whole thing with him on the tank barrel actually kind of funny slapstick. I'll like that gets like kind of a pass for me. But he is just sitting there screaming like an idiot for basically what felt like several uninterrupted minutes, and I'm like, oh my god, just push him out. Just hit the ejector seat button. Like please God, make it stop.
I love it though. But the bongo is what the ship was, right? That little.
Yeah, the boat is called
I,
the
I,
submarine.
I love it that when Obi-Wan's to Qui-Gon, he's like, "What's a bongo?" And Qui-Gon goes, "I have no idea, but hopefully it's a transport out of here."
What if it was? What if he handed him a bongo drum?
Yeah, that's what I thought when you first said that. I was like, "The bongo scene." When was he
No,
playing
I just remember.
bongos?
No, I just remember that because he says, "Misa give you sa una bongo."
God, I love the lines. I love them. I love every Gungan line,
That,
except
see, that's the problem. Is Boss Nass is also annoying, but because he's in the movie a lot less, he's objectively funny. He doesn't like hijack the movie like Jar Jar does. If Jar Jar were like a real side character, I think he would be fun. Like if Jar Jar hadn't come with them or like had been separated from them because he like let's say Jar Jar is takes them to the Gunga City, whatever, but he says, "Hey, I'm not getting on that ship because I can't leave my home planet," and then he's gone throughout the entire Tatooine sequence, and then comes back at the end of the movie. I think that might have made him a lot more tolerable as the comic relief character. Which, by the way, one more tiny thing I have to point out: Qui-Gon getting pissy with the captain for like wanting to bring quote the handmaiden along, while he's consensually choosing to bring Jar Jar is really stupid. Yes, Padme, you don't know that she can handle herself because she's a handmaiden to the queen and she's like 16 years old or whatever. You're bringing Jar Jar. Jar Jar is infinitely more of a liability. You could have picked three random dudes from the ship and it would have been like a better thing to do than bring Jar Jar anywhere. So I thought that scene was kind of dumb where he's like, I don't want to bring her. I think she'll just, he doesn't say this, but he's acting like she'll be a burden. Jar
But
Jar's coming with you.
but let me rate. This is similar to the question you had for me earlier. Do you think there was a possibility that Qui-Gon sensed that doing that would put things in motion be that wouldn't be good? Because I thought about it. If he had convinced Padme to stay on the ship, Anakin would have never met her at that point. He might
So
have met her on what?
I'm saying Padme, I think is an understandable decision, but also an understandable decision to be questionable of, in theory. But if you're already bringing someone who's infinitely worse, I feel like it's not your place to criticize.
No, I mean I don't think he was criticizing because like he. I think that there was. I don't think this, but I'm raising the theory to you if you think this is possible, considering that Qui-Gon was this like super connected to the Force Jedi who sensed things like you were saying earlier, the possibility that putting Anakin in that cockpit would lead to their victory. Do you think there's a possibility that he sensed it within the Force that bringing Padme along to Tatooine would introduce her to Anakin and thus set Anakin's fate in motion to becoming one with the dark side? Because if he hadn't met Padme in that scene, he would have met her later on the ship, but there's a good chance they wouldn't have made that connection and hadn't had fallen in love with each other.
Well, I mean, I guess you can almost make the same argument about Jar Jar. If Jar Jar hadn't gotten into a scrap with Sebulba, Qui-Gon might not have even noticed Anakin.
Well, but they had met him.
So if
before
we
that.
really want Qui-Gon to be like the light side equivalent of Palpatine here, you can certainly sell that. I think you can make that argument. It's not like there's a ton of evidence for it, but if you accept it in one case, it kind of works in the other cases too.
Right, so maybe that was why he was like, I don't want the handmaid, no more Queen's orders. I don't want the handmaid in here, because there was like a sense that he got. Because I remember he even said when he accepted it, he was like, "This is not a smart move," or like, "This doesn't feel."
Yeah, this is not a good idea.
This is not a good idea. Yeah, I almost wonder if there was like a feeling to him. I don't. Obviously, I'm not.
What if
Sure.
Qui-Gon had a feeling that their ship was going to get blown up if they flew to the Trade Federation ship for the negotiations, but he thought they had to anyway because he sensed it in the Force. We can run this argument indefinitely. Anyway, let's talk about Duel of the Fates, the best part of the movie. Unfortunately, interspersed with 3 parts of the movie that are less good.
Yeah, this scene is so fucking good. It's out of place. It's at the end of the movie, and because endings are so important, it convinced an entire generation of people this was a good movie. Because the end of this movie is genuinely incredibly well done. I mean, other than the pieces interspersed in between the battle that aren't as well done and kind of more silly, taking the scenes with the Jedi and Maul just isolating them and looking at them in seclusion. There are so many things about it that are so well done. I love the way that Maul is introduced, where he's just standing in the doorway menacingly, and the others that aren't Jedi, they're like, oh shit, and then the Jedi are both immediately like, we'll handle this, so they take off their coats, and then Maul immediately takes off his coat, and it's like they already know what's about to happen. And my god, I know this has been said before, but if the trailer hadn't already ruined it, that reveal of Maul having a double-sided lightsaber would have been mind-blowing at like first watch. If that wasn't ruined for everybody already, that people would have gone nuts seeing that double-bladed lightsaber just being revealed in that scene. And I think that was the intention when they made the scene, because it has such focus on him igniting one side and then igniting the other side. And some people, and I felt this way for a long time too. Some people will argue that the fight scene is over choreographed, and I don't actually feel that way anymore, because it has a sense of like detail where they take into account the characters' positions, and the actual like sword fighting seems very. It's probably the most like believable for me that these 3 people are dueling each other and trying to one up each other. There is still some good fights in the prequels later, like. A lot of the fights are good. Some of them not great, but a lot of them are good. But even those good fights, there's a lot of times within those fights where I'm like, it's not super believable. It's not like, I don't entirely believe that they're trying to kill each other in that moment. It looks like they're kind of just clashing for fun. But in this fight in particular, It's very well thought out. There's a lot of moments where swords clash, where you think to yourself like, oh, they were going for a kill move there. They were trying to do this or that, or the way that the plan that they have, the way they're trying to one up each other, like Maul kicking Obi-Wan off of the bridge to separate Qui-Gon from Obi-Wan. And to me, the best part of the scene is when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon get separated and they're behind those red walls, and Obi-Wan is sitting at the end anxious because he's unsure. He's separated from Qui-Gon. He wants to get in the fight with him. Qui-Gon kneels down and meditates, which is like pinnacle Jedi behavior to me. Like, that's exactly what I would believe a Jedi would do in this situation. And Maul is pacing at the very end like an animal, staring Qui-Gon dead in the face while he's meditating, like ready to just unleash himself and pounce as soon as that red wall comes apart. And it's just this small, quiet moment in the action that sets up these characters so well. Like, Maul's not said more than like 2 fucking sentences in this entire movie at this point. And that moment where he paces back and forth like an animal and just stares down Qui-Gon gives me more context and more information for him than I felt like I got for most of the characters in this movie. It's tragic. I mean, I think it's a little silly because we established early on in the movie that the Jedis can move like fucking vampires when the droidekas come after him.
Yeah, I still have no idea. That's still just one of the lazier parts of the movie to me.
But
why?
It makes it kind of silly because I thought to myself on this watch, like, why didn't Obi-Wan do that?
Yeah, why is Obi-Wan jogging to get to the battle?
And I said that to one of my friends who's also a fan of Star Wars, and they were like, well, they only use that amount of speed when it's necessary, and they otherwise want to conserve their energy and focus on the battle. And I'm like, well, it turned out to be pretty fucking necessary, honestly. Like, too bad Obi-Wan didn't get in that fight faster, or maybe Qui-Gon would have lived. Like,
yep.
If there's ever a time to maybe use that energy and do that in a critical time, it was right there. But if you ignore that earlier part of the movie and you take this moment where Obi-Wan basically just has to watch his master get killed, it's emotional, and it's a great performance in that moment from Ian McGregor to like where he screams no as Qui-Gon's going down having been stabbed, and Maul immediately spins and looks at him like, you're next. The whole scene, along with the music being incredible, it seems so out of place in this movie that's so silly and so like garbage, honestly, but in a good way, like we've established. Like, it's just silly and sloppy and not super well thought out. This scene honestly feels so out of place because it is detailed. It tells you so much without actually saying anything. It shows you things happening. It gives you context without over exposing anything, like giving you too much exposition. There's hardly anything explained to you in the scene, but it tells you so much about these characters right up until the battle's over. Like, and the last flurry between Obi-Wan and Maul, I think is like maybe the best fight in the entirety of Star Wars, as maybe not including the original trilogy, because I think there's some that are just as intense and just as well choreographed there. But throughout most of the entire saga, that little last flurry between Obi-Wan and Maul is so well done. There's so much going on there, and it's incredibly satisfying to see Obi-Wan get the win and officially kind of go from Padawan to Knight in that moment. That's how I've always seen it. It's with the context that Dave Filoni gave, where Qui-Gon's death meant the fate of Anakin was sealed. It does actually add kind of a weight to that. Something I never really felt myself watching, but after hearing him explain that and then watching the film myself, I do see that, specifically because I don't know if this was intended, or I don't know if this was something that like people had always seen, but I only just now noticed on this watch they cremate Qui-Gon, and the scene is very reflective of the scene where Luke cremates Vader. Did you ever notice that?
I noticed something in that scene, but it's not what you just said.
Well, I only noticed at this watch. It seems like that was kind of a nod to the ending of Return of the Jedi there, because it's the same music, it's similar shots, and they both are their bodies are both disposed of in the exact same way. And I thought, wow, that's like a really that to me gives more credence to Filoni's whole thing about like Qui-Gon dying basically sealed Anakin's fate to turn to the dark side, but also in that same vein, sealed his fate to eventually turn back because of Luke and the ending of Return of the Jedi as a whole, you know? And to me, that was actually kind of poetic. As George would say, it's like poetry, it rhymes.
The bet George Lucas just has clip ready, and I think George Lucas has a secret Twitter account where every time someone points out like how things in the movies are similar, he just sends that and it's an automatic defense. But okay, a few. So there are a lot of things that I want to go off with that. But one thing I want to point out really quickly, speaking of Darth Maul, that isn't about Duel of the Fates, is the fact that he nearly runs over Anakin on Tatooine, not knowing who he is. Can you imagine if he had just like barreled over Anakin there and went back to Sidious? He was like, "You idiot! I needed that kid." And he's like, "What? You didn't say anything about that." I just thought he was some random kid. Why didn't you tell me he was the key to everything?
that would have been hilarious.
But so okay, so Duel of the Fates. The music is great. The setting is great. Look, I think reasonable people can disagree about the prequel fight choreography in general because it is very flashy. It is a little professional wrestling to me, honestly.
Yeah.
I will say, not so much. I don't know that this one necessarily was more believable in the sense of just like the choreography of it. I will say though, knowing like as a fan of the expanded universe, knowing what we know about Maul, the idea that his fight would be a little more flashy and that his power is more like kind of raw and physical, whereas someone like Dooku's is like Dooku and Maul are not strong warriors in the same way.
Yeah.
So for Maul, I feel like that's the reason why I might give it a pass is because it makes sense that this guy who has this unorthodox weapon would have an unorthodox style as well, and would have a style that's not reflective of like the knight sword fighting that you kind of expect to see in that situation. I will say this though. I'm gonna be the asshole for a moment about this. I think when you said you thought the last clash between Obi-Wan and Maul was like maybe the best fight in the whole prequel. I think that is very well choreographed, very energetic. I think it's a little too it's not reflective of the emotion anymore. Like compare it to when Luke just beat the snot out of Vader after he threatened Leia. He's not still doing his moves. He's not still playing tricks like hiding in the shadows and ducking like throwing lightsabers and this and that. He's just like he's really letting the way he fights tell the story of how the characters are feeling. Obi-Wan in that moment, yeah, he screams, but he doesn't change anything about the fight and it doesn't progress it forward as well, in my opinion, as I wish it did. I wish I wish they had moved away in that moment from the choreography, simple and raw, to sell the idea that Obi-Wan is not only angry, but he's fighting with some desperation because he's now essentially outclassed, and both of the people fighting know it. But I just feel like he comes out and he's doing the same moves they were doing like 10 minutes ago. So I've always found that bit a little disappointing personally because I wanted to feel like the weight of the scene had shifted and it doesn't really feel like it does. Also, the one thing that I will say that just as a minor point that I find hilarious is Maul basically has the fight won. Why is he just like slicing the top of the ledge? Like why is he doing that?
Oh, yeah.
I've never understood. Is he taunting him? Is he trying to cut the piece off? Is he trying to blind him with the sparks? Is he... I've never understood what he's doing there, but he had the fight won.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't know if I'd entirely agree. I think that there was... Like, when the sense that I got when he came out of the red force field thing and started attacking them all was that he was a lot more fierce and fast and like focused than he was fighting beforehand. In my opinion, that's kind of I got that impression this last watch. I do think that it was still very choreographed. It was still very, like you were saying, flashy and professional wrestling. But to me, it was a lot more like it was a lot more fast and fierce from Obi-Wan, because he was no longer coming from a place of training. And well, he was still coming from a place of training, but he was no longer coming from a place of confidence and more from a place of like emotion and anger that Maul had just murdered his master in front of him. And he hits in like cutting the lightsaber in half, and he does ultimately like have a moment where he's about to lose because Maul gets him in that little circle area where he's hanging off. But then to do like the jump over Maul and then slice him in half, which I think is very interesting to take to like note when you take into account how he beats Anakin later. It for me, it was like Obi-Wan was kind of throwing a lot of his defensiveness and a lot of his training out the window for offense and fierceness, and like actually getting up to in Maul's face and matching him with that physicality that Maul was bringing to the fight earlier. But I can see your perspective too. I think that there's also an argument that it was just a lot of the same stuff as before.
Yeah, and I can see what you're saying too. So I have two closing thoughts on Phantom Menace. One is a quick thing. You mentioned the funeral pyre scene. The thing that I noticed there that's absolutely hilarious to me is,
how do the Jedi know about the rule of two? No.
Well, but this is about that. So after he says which was destroyed, the master or the apprentice. The next shot cuts right to Sheev Palpatine.
That's right.
Just like immediately, it's like foreshadowing, solid foreshadowing. Who's the other Sith? We don't know. Oh, we're just gonna cut to this other person who's attending the funeral. No reason. He had one conversation with this guy, maybe, but he's here at the funeral and we're gonna show you his face. Well, I thought that was funny.
That's like what I was saying to you a few weeks ago, where I was like, do you think the people that were at that celebration of Naboo, like later on 50 years down the road, like saw that picture and they were going to their kids, they're like, oh, that's the Jedi, that's the little boy, that's Boss Nass, that's the Queen, that's the Dark Lord of the Sith. Whoops.
So my last closing thought about the Phantom Menace that I'll say, and it has to do with that Filoni clip, because that clip is very interesting and very insightful. And I said this when I first saw it. That clip underlies, I think, the core reason why Phantom Menace, even though it still has a place in my heart, I watched my VHS copy 100 times.
Same.
When I was a kid, and I'll probably watch this movie 100 more times before I die. The reason why I think the movie breaks down, though, is that idea that Filoni is talking about is really fascinating and really shows, I think. I don't know if George has ever said, like, I 100% agree with that statement, or if he would say that or whatever. But to me, it's a way to look at both the idea, but then compare it to the execution. Because the ideas in the story that Lucas wanted to tell, there are a lot of good ones, but just did not pan out in such a way where the ideas that he has are delivered in a medium that is good. And I think the problem with the thing that Filoni is doing, not that he's wrong, but that's happening, and you're in that moment, you're in that situation, the duel that will decide the fate of Anakin and his destiny as the chosen one, and like what path he will ultimately walk. You're in that moment, you're in the scene, they're fighting with that on the line, but you've just had to sit through 2 hours of shit that you don't care about.
Yeah, where they didn't focus on this thing that he's
that's
explaining.
what breaks that's why the movie ultimately sort of fails to execute that vision, is because it has these really great ideas, but it doesn't deliver them in a package that you really want to open. At least for many people. Again, for some people, they really want to open that package, and they will write 30,000-word articles about why you should open it too, and we're opening it right now in some way. Like, I get that. But just, like, if you want to your good ideas and your in-depth storytelling and stuff, they really aren't worth as much if you don't wield the medium that you're using to tell them well. And I just don't think this movie does.
Yeah, if they had focused a whole hell of a lot more on the explanation that Filoni gave, or at least focused enough on it that I didn't need Filoni to explain it to me to even see it, because I never really got that impression up until Filoni broke it down for me, you know? And for me, this movie just kind of falls apart on a structural level. Again, I'm not saying every movie has to follow the exact same structure, but there's a lot of things that are missing in this movie that they don't replace it with anything. Like there's no B story, or if there is, it's hard to tell between that and the A story because both stories are so muddled. There's no midpoint. There's no end. The end of the movie doesn't have a point where you're like at the lowest of the low and have to come back and triumphantly take victory. There's no focus on any of these points, and the movie suffers because of that. There's no like natural engagement. There's just things that happen, and there's a lot of things that happen beneath the surface that are interesting and if you and like almost engaging and almost well done, but a lot of it's half baked. A lot of it isn't expanded upon enough, and what you're seeing in front of you just is none of it. And for a lot of the movie, it really suffers because of that. The only saving grace for me is how fucking silly it is all the way through. That really saves it for me.
And the one other point that I want to make that I just like thought of, like you said, there's no point. To me, I think one of the issues, and again, maybe there are other movies, other ways you could tell a story where this could work. To me, the issue that I would say, like we came to the consensus earlier, Anakin is the main character, right? Even though he's not introduced until 35 minutes in, whatever you want to say, Anakin is the main character. Anakin, the main character, is basically completely removed from like the stakes at play. Like, yeah, he's in a space battle that's important and he could die or they could fail the mission. And those are stakes, I mean, obviously, in some way. But what's, like, the biggest challenge that Anakin faces up there? The ship stalls for 5 seconds, and he ends up stumbling ass backward into winning the fight because his ship stalled out and he got shot at. Like, there's not really...
Sue.
What?
What a Mary Sue.
Yeah. There's not really, like, he's removed from the core tension. The lowest point moment is Qui-Gon's death. But the main character of the movie is not present for that. He's out in space. And not that Obi-Wan is a bad character, but to me it just seems like an odd choice to be like, the darkest point, the moment where all is lost, is when the number 2 character gets killed and the number 3 character has to step in. Like, it just seems like a bad idea to do a story like that. But that's what happened.
It also is odd that the darkest point, like the lowest point of the film, happens at the very end. It still manages to like have an uplifting, fun, like celebratory ending, but most of the time to keep an engaging movie, one where you are invested, you'd have that moment be like 2/3 of the way through the movie for then the good guys to come back and get retribution for that. But it just kind of happens, and it's emotional, and in its isolation, well done. But it doesn't really serve the movie as a whole,
Yeah, that's fair.
Anyways, we've spent an hour and a half talking about Phantom Menace.
Yeah, so let's keep going.
Right.
So now we go to a slightly better or slightly worse movie, depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go out on a limb for something here.
Okay.
I have long advocated that I think Attack of the Clones is a slightly better movie than Phantom Menace because it has less boring parts and has more shooty lasers. It's also dumb. It also has a lot of structural problems. But I thought the vibe was a little more space action adventure, and that made me like it a little more. Just a bit. Neither of them are very good, but I've always said that Phantom Menace is my least favorite. Attack of the Clones is just above it. I'm not so sure about that anymore.
Okay.
Independent of independent of another movie in the franchise that we're not going to address at all today. Um, I think Phantom Menace might be. I think they might have switched places.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Because for
Oh,
me,
Jesus Christ.
upon rewatch, I thought they switched for me.
What?
Yeah, Attack of the Clones
Oh, you've
is
got to be kidding me.
okay. Let me explain.
Yeah,
So
neither of us think this is a good movie. Let's not get crazy.
no. So the stance that we used to have is that I thought Attack of the Clones was the worst, and Troy thought Phantom Menace was the worst. He has now changed his stance upon rewatch. Possibly, we'll get more into that. And I think I've changed my stance upon rewatch because while it doesn't have that grand,
Well, you also think the movie that shall not be named is worse than both, whereas I don't.
which movie?
Do you not think?
Oh,
Rise of-
yes, yeah. We'll get to that later.
Yeah,
That movie's
but I'm just saying,
trash.
like that's another just difference in our rankings that hasn't been resolved yet. But anyway, just pointing that out. Continue.
I actually think that despite the fact that this movie is just as silly, if not sillier, has even dumber lines, and doesn't have a moment really in it that is as good as the Duel of Fate scene. There's no like really well done moment in this movie. It sounds bad. It at least follows a better structure overall. It at least is more energetic. It didn't put me to sleep for 30 minutes, crucially. And honestly, I think it was a little overall more enjoyable to watch for me. It was flashier. It was more engaging in the sense that the things that I was watching pulled me more. That there was better pacing throughout. The characters gave better performances, only slightly, but a little bit better performances. And it's hard because on one hand, for me, Phantom Menace is just a snooze fest slog all the way through, most of the way through, up until the pod racing scene, but even more so the Duel of Fate scene, which I think is genuinely an incredible scene in a bad movie. There's no really incredible scenes in Attack of the Clones, but there's also not that much like put you to sleep boringness. There's just a lot of silliness, and the fact that there's more silliness, more dumb lines, and more kind of like delicious garbage in this movie makes it more enjoyable for me to watch. And I think upon rewatch it was slightly better, which is hilarious that we've taken.
That's great. My thing like to that, because I mean that was my case forever as well. And I mean I think there is a part of me that still thinks that. I think those two are just destined to kind of flip flop for all time. For me, just the thing that kind of caught with me more with Phantom Menace was just like, for all of the faults of Phantom Menace, I do think there is an underlying depth to it that you can dig up. Now, again, not only am I now an adult and I'm watching this thing designed for kids, but I'm a huge nerd. So and I tried to defend this before, again, like, to me, the political structure isn't boring as much as it is just not good. Like, I think that's an important distinction. Like, it's not that it bores me, it's that I don't think it's good. But there is an underlying depth to Phantom Menace, and to even the politics, but more to just, like, kind of the philosophies that are being looked at, like the differences between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and that kind of thing. Attack of the Clones, once you get past the shooty laser parts, besides the vague intrigue of the mystery of what's up with the clones, there's nothing really interesting going on with the wider world because the war is so, like, poorly established. So, especially, it's weird because, like, the reveal of the clones, again, that mystery is not too bad. Well, like, slash who's trying to assassinate Padme, although I'll get to in a minute why I think that mystery is actually kind of dumb. Once you resolve that, I feel like there's not a whole lot of intrigue still going on beyond the very kind of rock brain, like, ooh, are they going to get shot by the battle droids? Which, I mean, that's something, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to say I'm not here for that. But upon this rewatch, the thing that I just realized was Phantom Menace, at least, it just has more depth to it. Some of it's boring, most of it's not very well executed, but there is, I think, a bigger well of ideas going on in 1 than in 2, and that made me a little more sympathetic to 1 and a little less sympathetic to 2.
Yeah, and I get that, and I think that was the perspective I had for the longest time. But coming into these movies with this new perspective that I was having, which was just let the silliness happen, don't get too invested or too immersed, and don't take it too seriously. That really, really worked in Attack of the Clones' favor because it's sillier.
That's true.
It's got dumber lines. It's got a lot of things that you really shouldn't take seriously because if you do, it will fall apart for you within minutes. All the romance stuff between Anakin and Padme is hilarious. Anakin's such a creepy bastard.
I was gonna say, I think we should just do that now because it's historically the biggest meme in the movie.
it's so. It's flashy too. On top of that, there's a big fight scene at the end that while not as deep or as well executed as the Duel of Fates, in fact, the lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin versus Dooku is hilariously bad. There's an entire point where it's like they're just flinging the lightsabers in front of their own faces. At least that's what it looks like.
Oh my god. Okay, where do we start? Do we want to do fighting first or romance first?
Let's do fighting first because it would segue nicely into this because we were just talking about a lot of the fighting in Phantom Menace.
Okay, what the hell? I had not noticed this, and they do this in Sith sometimes too, and it drives me crazy. Why are there so many shots during duels? Why are there so many close-ups of people's faces?
Where the lightsaber's just flinging by?
I've never noticed that being that annoying before, but in the duel between Dooku and Anakin, I remember that stuff being cool because there's, smoke and the room is dark. Here it was just are you guys even, did you guys just get tired of choreographing? I never noticed it being this bad before, but in the duel between Dooku and Anakin, it drove me fucking nuts.
It's so bad. And
also, I didn't realize, just one quick thing, I thought that fight was a lot more competitive than it actually was. Child me thought that the good guys and the bad guys were fighting and whatever. Dooku's just dancing on them.
Dominant.
It's really bad. Obviously, I know he just smokes up Anakin because he's a Padawan. I thought Obi-Wan lasted a little longer than he did. I was like, wait, Obi-Wan's out of the fight already? What?
Yeah,
wow.
No, Obi-Wan, like I said, I've said this before. Obi-Wan, he might be the best duelist ever, but the one guy that he couldn't do a damn thing against was supposedly the best duelist of all time in the Star Wars universe, Count Dooku. Obi-Wan I think has won every other fight he's ever had, at least shown on screen. The 2 times he's lost, he took devastating losses to who was supposedly the actual best duelist in Jedi history. And that's really shown in these scenes. He just fucking trounces them.
Yeah. Which is funny too cuz unironically the Obi-Wan Jango Fett fight is probably a lot better.
Yeah.
Even though it's
kicks on each other.
Even though it's not the climax, it's and I mean it is cool seeing someone who's not a Jedi or a Force user kind of hang with someone who is, or at least be able to not just get smoked up by them instantly.
Yeah, Jango was honestly cooler than Boba for the longest time because of these scenes. He actually showed the coolness of a Mandalorian, Jango, was he actually a Mandalorian?
I don't think so.
He was trained. He was trained in in some way though.
Yeah, somehow. I can't remember. I don't remember the details of that. There's an explanation for it out there somewhere. Here, but let's get into some of the main plot elements.
Something that I want to give credit to Attack of the Clones is that they actually follow a structure that's engaging and that keeps you in the movie for, at least it kept me in the movie longer. There are actual points in the movie that you can look at to think oh, this is where this part happens. This is the opening is about 20 minutes. It gives you kind of an intro to everything. There's a call to action for the heroes. There's a B story for Obi-Wan to follow. There's a midpoint where the stakes raise there's a point where it feels like the bad guys are closing in, and then they capture Obi-Wan and Anakin, and it feels like there's this like low point before the Jedi show up, and there's this giant climax where everybody gets their retribution for the low points. And it's funny because it follows the structure, even though what it's presenting to you with this structure is kind of toilet paper. There's so many things that if you actually think about what's going on, make no sense whatsoever. But following that structure does so much for it to keep you engaged anyways.
You know, it's funny, like, we've talked before about how my theory that if any single filmmaker did all of the sequels, they would have turned out better than the way things played out. This almost feels like it's a similar idea, except it can't be because it's all George. And what I mean by that is, like, right at the beginning, because I do agree with you, like, the structure is better. I think, like I said, the mystery element, I think, does create kind of like a smaller tension that then better builds into the main tension of the war and stuff like that. And the mystery, I mean, obviously you can't plant all the seeds for that perfectly. You got to do at least a little bit of expositioning in the second movie to get that ball rolling. But one of the things that just stuck out to me about the whole assassination aspect is just like, given that something annoyed me about the fact that Padme walks into correctly identifies the person behind her assassination, and it's a person you've never seen before or heard of.
Yeah.
And something about that just seemed to kind of deflate the idea. I mean, obviously, if you're a first-time viewer, maybe you're like, oh my God, she was right. But I feel like you can't do that because you don't know who Dooku is.
Right.
Like I feel like they should have played up that it was the Trade Federation guys again. And then Dooku you introduce as the new... Like you kind of discover that you thought you had taken down this Enterprise in the first movie, but guess what? They're back again in the second. And there's a vested interest in the Trade Federation trying to kill this specific person, a motive that has been established because you saw the previous movie. And of course, they get to that later, and Newt Gunray's there and says, like, I'm not signing your treaty until she's dead. But I don't know, to me, something about it just kind of took the wind out. Like, from a structure standpoint, where, like, imagine you just walk in and say to anyone, like, oh, I think it was Evil Bob who's trying to kill me. And you're like, who? And then an hour later, Evil Bob shows up. It's like, hey, I'm the one who was trying to kill you. It just, I don't know, it doesn't feel as satisfying to me.
It also doesn't
it does for me because I know who Dooku is and I understand the story. But I feel like if you're trying to look at it, like, from a first-time viewer... that mystery doesn't hook you. The clone mystery, I think, is the better hook. Which is funny, because there's, like, no characters that you become attached to. Lives are really, like, directly at stake because of that. Whereas a major character is about to get assassinated. Which, by the way, not to belittle the value of Padme, I didn't want her to die or anything. Can you imagine, like, right now, like... I mean, I guess in real life it's not the same because, like, we're all used to, like, our security and stuff like that. It's weird that they're like, look, whatever happens, this one congressperson cannot be assassinated, otherwise we're all screwed. Like, why was she, like, that important? I don't know how to say that without sounding like a jackass, but, like, it's, like, the part where this really hit me is after Obi-Wan gets captured. And Mace Windu's like, nope, don't come help. Protect the senator. Like, why? Why is she so important? Also, they're not, like, have her just stay at the Lars house. No one knows where they are anyway.
Yeah,
I just that was just the thing I thought was funny is everyone's like, no, you don't, and this isn't the president. It's like this one senator cannot die, otherwise the whole everything. I don't know.
well, yeah, I mean,
Maybe I'm just a dick.
there's the whole assassination plot doesn't make any sense either. There's a hilarious bit that maybe you've heard of before from a YouTuber that I really like called Cosmonaut Variety Hour. It's a hilarious bit when he's reviewing the prequels where he breaks down like what if you actually break down like Dooku's plan or Sidious's plan to kill Padme, it makes no sense. And basically what he says is Sidious wants to kill Padme, but he doesn't want to do it himself. So he tells Count Dooku to do it, but Dooku doesn't want to do it himself. So he hires a bounty hunter named Jango Fett to do it, but Jango Fett doesn't want to go do it himself. So he hires a changeling to do it. who then puts bugs in a robot to go do it. It's like all
The bounty hunter, it works right up until you get to a bounty hunter hiring another bounty hunter. Like, imagine if that had happened. Like, I want you to like think back to the halcyon days of Empire Strikes Back. Imagine if they were all on the Star Destroyer, and Boba Fett gets the job to go find the Millennium Fountain. Darth Vader says, "Okay, I want you to go find the Millennium Fountain," and Boba Fett's like, "Okay," and immediately turns to Bosk. It's like, "Bosk, I want to pay you to go find the Millennium Fountain." That would be the stupidest thing. Anyone like, why would you possibly do that? Especially because like it's not like it's his like bounty hunter apprentice or something. Like, what are we paying you for? We're paying you to organize.
And even more ridiculous is that Jango Fett has
Zam myself
when they capture the changeling bounty hunter. Jango Fett has an opportunity to go kill Padme himself because she's not being protected.
And he knows
and
this.
And he goes and kills the bounty hunter he hired instead.
It's so funny. Also, one minor thing I want to point out though that's like really relevant to that scene. This is a really stupid question. I don't mean to get all like detail nitpicky about stuff. How does parking work on Coruscant? Because Obi-Wan lands this aerial vehicle about 6 inches from a crowd of people. Was that a legal parking spot? Because that seems really dangerous for flying cars to just land on people's heads.
Yeah.
Something about that I just noticed. Like, he just stops the speeder right by the door. It's like, dude, you're in a downtown metro. You're parking in a garage and walking 6 blocks to get to that bar. Don't even pretend.
Another thing that's always been funny to me is that right after Obi-Wan is giving Anakin a lesson in patience and like taking things slowly and like taking your time and trusting the Force, they go into the room. Anakin kills the bugs. Obi-Wan sees the droid out the window and fucking dives headfirst out the window. You'd think Anakin would do something like that.
Yeah, Anakin has to be the one to go save him. I've always wondered, like, was George trying to do some, like... Was that just meant to be, like, an inversion thing for the fun of it? Or was, like, he trying to do some, like, one of his George Lucas actually, like, here's the true meaning things? Because I've never understood why Anakin wouldn't kill the bugs, see the window...
And immediately...
And jump out it, and then Obi-Wan would go save him. Especially because, like, 10 minutes later... Well, number one, Anakin spends the whole rest of the scene being an idiot, taking fake shortcuts, ducking through traffic like a madman, and then he jumps out of the speeder anyway.
Yeah, if you excuse me.
He does the exact thing that he does the exact thing that Obi-Wan just did, and funnily enough, Obi-Wan scolds him for it. It's like, that's where I would have been. If I were Anakin, I would have turned around and flipped him off as I was falling. It's like, you just did the same thing 5 minutes ago, and now you're looking at me like I'm some kind of idiot. No, that entire scene is so funny, and the funny part about it too is like, there's like a brief window where the stories like converge a little bit, where it gets kind of like clever in a certain way, where the idea that there was a Jedi who deleted information from like the archives, like even though you don't really know that much about the Jedi Order, they do a decent job of selling you that that's like a scandalous thing to do, that's like a huge red flag. So it's funny because it starts out really dumb, but then once they tie it into the other one, like they have this brief moment where they're not so dumb, but then it goes back to being dumb because he gets to Kamino, and this Jedi Master that someone you've never heard of, made this order, and that's supposed to feel like it raises the tension, but you're like, ooh, who is this guy that I've never seen? Like, and again, like now it's time for us to get into it. Like, Clone Wars and the other ancillary media have like filled this gap to make this matter, but it's so weird that like they're just like, oh yeah, this Jedi you've never heard of and that we've never talked about put us in an order for an army. We don't know why, but I guess we'll just take it anyway.
Yeah, if like, Obi-Wan had asked more questions, he might have been able to uncover the whole plot right there. Like if he had just like kind of when he was done with the movie, like, by the way, Uh, this whole thing on Camino is fucking weird, and I think there is kind of like a maybe a minor explanation that like the Jedi were just kind of happy to have an army at their back finally when they were facing such a huge threat as like the Separatists and the droid army. Maybe that's why they're like, all right, whatever, no questions asked, we have an army, that's good. But at the same time, it seems pretty dumb that asking those questions, like if Obi-Wan had just paid more attention and asked more questions in those scenes, he probably could have like uncovered everything before it happened in episode 3.
Yeah, also, if Sifo Dyas died right after he placed that order, did the Kaminoans just not, like, contact anyone for 10 years and just assume that someone was gonna come pick up the order? Wouldn't that be weird? Like, if you ordered something, I get that it takes, like, a long time, but wouldn't you expect, like, here's our annual progress report on your order or something? Why is no one responding to these emails inviting you to come look at the army? Like, the Kaminoans are really weird about, like, what if Obi-Wan had never come? Would they just be like, well, we filled this whole order. No Jedi ever bothered to come pick it up, though.
That was kind of the impression I was getting when they're like, "Oh, we've been expecting you." It's like for 10 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say, at what point do you stop expecting and start being like, "Hey, are you gonna send anyone down here to come check on this?" It's such a funny. It's just so funny because like it's weird. Like the movie, like 1 and 2 just have like so. Again, just like the sequels, except they're all made by the same guy. They're just like really different in really funny ways. Like the first one, the mystery is like the first one has essentially no mystery. All the information is given to the audience. The Sith are back. They are dangerous, and here's what they want to do. And it's the main characters who don't know that, who are not all the main characters, but there are people in the universe who don't know that information. Here, it's like constantly revealing suspicious secrets and then people not being curious about them. Like, this is the movie where the meme of like Yoda needs to retire really comes into play because Yoda and Mace should have been a little more on top of this. Like, why do we have this army? Also, this army is based off someone who's actively working against our interests. That's not suspicious.
Yeah.
It's so stupid.
Yeah. But it really speaks to how a movie is made when one movie makes more sense, but it feels like it's being read to you off a teleprompter, and the other movie makes no sense, but it actually looks and feels like a movie. And that second option, to me, was the more enjoyable experience, especially because, and probably specifically because, I was watching this with a new perspective. Like, there's perspective of not taking things as seriously, enjoying the silliness rather than like condemning it, and that really, really worked in favor of this movie, especially because nothing fucking made sense. But it was fun. It was enjoyable. There was a lot of lightsabers. There was a lot of action, and I think because of that, I enjoyed it slightly more than Phantom Menace. Even the scenes that were incredible, like the writing in Attack of the Clones is like dog shit.
It's pretty bad.
It's the romance, which we're going to start with and haven't even got into yet.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in a second. I have one more thing about the mystery element, though.
Go ahead, because I was about to go into the romance.
Like, the other thing that I just noticed, like I mentioned earlier, that like Yoda needs to retire because they're like really uncurious about this whole thing. There's just a lot of little. Like, it's weird because in one sense I think you can sort of make a case that it's sort of enriching to the universe. Like, frankly, if I were Obi-Wan, I wouldn't have even bothered to ask why the planet wasn't there, or like I wouldn't have even bothered to try to figure it out before. I would just like, space travel is no object to you guys. You guys clearly have the resources to just fly there anyway. Just little things like that I've always found really amusing about kind of the way the mystery process is like dragged along. And again, I don't want to like nitpick too much, but it's just when you take it in totality, it's like hard. It's hard not to see all these things and be like, well, if these 10 decisions. Like, how do I explain that? Like, it's hard for me to find where the line is between, well, these 10 decisions are bad writing and bad plot development, and these 10 decisions are nitpicking. Like, I don't know where that line is, so I'm just going to barrel past it, and I'm going to point out, all the little dumb things. Now, that said, there are some dumb things also that are kind of pointless but also hilarious. The Death Sticks thing makes me laugh every time,
it's so
without
great.
fail.
So great.
I love it. It means nothing. Does not. You could cut it and literally wouldn't matter at all. But it's really funny.
It's so great. I love that.
One of my favorite little details that I noticed is Kid Boba Fett constantly being like, "Yeah, Dad, go get him."
Yeah, fire.
It's really funny. But nothing in the plot will ever be as funny as the romance. And the weird thing is, to me personally, I'm gonna go for the bold take here. It's almost defensible in a way.
No, I agree. There's a perspective you can take, a very specific and nuanced perspective you can
For
take.
me, the perspective is just Anakin was raised in a religious isolation, basically, to put it bluntly, like kind of dehumanizing in a sense tradition for half of his life. There is no way. I never say this, but I'm just going to say it because it's the best way I can describe it. The fact that kid has zero riz, as the kids say, is about the least surprising and most sensible thing I could possibly think of. It makes perfect sense. He has been raised as a monk for 10 years. What do you expect from this guy?
That's true, but also there are specific things that happen in this movie that I just cannot believe Padme doesn't fucking run from.
Yes, that's like the flip side. Anakin, sorry, but like that's how I would explain it. Anakin's side of it is kind of understandable, actually, even though his performance is arguably worse. It's the Padme character side of it that ends up being the most fundamental problem, which I don't think is how people usually contextualize it. They usually see Anakin's dialogue and his performance and make fun of Anakin. But Padme, it's the Padme side where all logic breaks down. Sorry, that dawned on me.
Well, it's true, but also the only way I can possibly defend it is that she was in love with who he was, except who he was a kid, which makes her a pedophile, like I was saying earlier. Like,
okay, you and I had very different defenses for this.
Well, that's the only way I can see, because like, if you weren't so closely tied to this person already, when he comes back from the Sand People and he basically exclaims that he murdered every single person, and he focuses on it and says not just the men, but the women and the children too, how does Padme not fucking run after that? How does she sit there and like comfort him? The only possible explanation I can see where that happens is that she's already been in love with him this whole time, and has been since they were young, and Anakin was pretty damn young at that time. This is a genuine stance that I've seen people take, that like Padme is kind of a pedophile.
This took a real turn.
I've seen it online. There are people that genuinely wholeheartedly believe this.
But like, honestly, look, okay, so I'm just gonna cut right to the chase. One of the reasons that I relate to this as from a comedic standpoint, but also honestly in a certain sense from an emotional standpoint, is because not that I was anywhere near Anakin level, but I was a romantically challenged person for very much of my life. but I think that gives, like, I think when you've been that person, when you've been a guy who's not good with women, it gives you like a new perspective on people who are even worse with women than you are.
Right.
And every scene was so rich in those details for me. Like, let's just, you know what I'm doing? I'm going right from the beginning. He walks in, you've grown more beautiful, I mean, well, for a senator, I mean, lame, awkward, all those things. But again, he's 18, and all he's been told is don't ever feel emotions. He doesn't know how to handle this situation. That's fine. You know what? Gets a pass. Then he gets into a whiny little argument with Obi-Wan in front of her. Not a good idea, but that's like more of an overall personality point. Then they have that conversation where he complains about not being held back. And in my opinion, the worst moment of the romance in the whole movie, even worse than the Tusken Raider stuff, the glare that he gives her, and she says, "Please stop looking at me like that."
Yeah.
Why? It makes me feel uncomfortable. His glance as she's walking away
Sorry, my lady.
makes me think that he's about to do something very illegal. It's honestly worse to me than, like I said, it's honestly worse to me than the Tuscan stuff, because at least the Tuscan stuff, his mother just died. Like, and he's, again, not good at handling his emotions. It's bad, and again, I don't think you should fall in love with him.
Yeah.
But I don't defend the mass murder. I defend the screaming and crying of regret / rage about the mass murder and the death that preceded it. That's an emotional outburst. But the scene in the bedroom is just the creepiest thing I've ever seen. Just absolute F- behavior. Hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it.
He even says, "I'm sorry, milady," in like this incel
yeah, and
way.
he has a smirk.
Yeah.
It's so bad. And then the other parts there are some parts that I think are not as bad. Like, look, I don't like sand. Everyone memes on it, and I get why, because it's such a weird contrast between sand and a human woman, because he's very clearly not talking about Naboo at that point.
Yeah.
There is some value to, like, sort of the sand as like a symbolism, like what it represents, the painful past it represents versus like the better present. I think you can kind of read it that way, but it's just so weird. And the fact that he's rubbing her shoulder while he says that is just weird.
And the fact that she goes for it.
Yeah, the fact that she goes for it too, and then they stare at each other for what feels like 10 minutes before she finally goes for it. But honestly, to me, the part that made me just like laugh the most, I'll get to the last two scenes, then I'll let you go. This is like one of my favorite parts of this movie from a why it's bad perspective, so I'm just going off on a rant. The two other scenes are one in the field, where has a decent like line here, I would say, where she says, like, you really don't like politicians, do you? And he says, I like 2 or 3. Not really sure about one of them. That is a decent teasing line that I could see myself, saying, I could see people saying, but then immediately he starts arguing for a dictatorship.
Yeah.
Like, immediately, he makes like one bit of progress and then just immediately goes off on the total deep end. And it's just, again, get away from this situation. This guy is very
She's like,
clearly...
oh, that's cute.
Like, he's not just shitting on your profession, he's advocating for fascist dictatorship. It's baffling. Obviously, the fireplace scene is iconic for that speech.
Oh my god.
And how, like, anti-Shakespeare it is.
Yeah, I'm in agony.
You are in my very soul, tormenting me. I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me. But to me, do you want to know what kind of the part of that scene that I noticed this time? Was how it really comes out of nowhere. In the sense of the scene immediately preceding it, they're at the dinner table and they're having a nice little chat about, he's telling her Jedi stories or whatever, right? And then it immediately cuts to this scene where they're in this much more intimate, serious conversation with absolutely no transition at all. Like, when they're out on the dock and the whole sand thing happens, yeah, it's weird that she goes for it, but at least it kind of, the tension starts to build. Like, they're having a conversation, and he steers it towards, like, a double entendre thing, and then he touches her. But with the dinner table and then with the fireplace scene, it's like if they had the dinner table scene and then immediately cut to a shot of him on one knee with a ring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it just starts out of nowhere. It completely changes, like, the tempo with no setup at all for me. Like, haha, yeah, we're having dinner. I love you so much more than any... Like, it's such an awkward transition that doesn't, like... organically build up at all. It's like, what were you guys doing? Were you guys talking about the weather before this? Like, I don't know. It's so bad. But again, I can almost defend it because this guy has been raised as a monk. He has no idea what he's doing.
Well, the defense I have for it isn't even one that I really personally relate to. I find it odd that despite it being so clearly Rizless, as you were saying, and like creepy almost, creepy actually, not even almost, just like literally creepy, that Anakin has like such a fucking following from a lot of the female audience. This doesn't sound silly for two guys to talk about, but
But you're right.
I've noticed like in my past dating experience, people that I've known who have been like Anakin's the hottest guy in all of Star Wars. It's like why? Because like what? How does that happen? Like there's something about him, and it can't just be that he's attractive, quote unquote. There's something about him and his monk ass like not knowing how to, or maybe it's just the fact that he's like risky, you know, and then like kind of like dangerous in that way, which I know there's also a lot of women that like that. Again, I think it's very silly for me and another guy to be sitting here talking about what women like, because you know we're not women. But this does exist. I've seen this in people that I know that think that for some reason Anakin is like the heartthrob of the Star Wars universe, and it's not just because he's a tragic character, and it's not just because he's attractive. You know?
Well, can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Do you find that is because like how do I ask this? Like from my sense, that could be largely driven by Episode 3 or even Clone Wars Anakin more than this one. Do you find that it's like specifically Attack of the Clones, or like Attack of the Clones isn't excluded from that calculus?
No, because Attack of the Clones is where a lot of the romance happens. In his Episode 3, there's actually less romance in Episode 3 and in Episode 1. A lot of like the budding affection for each other happens in Attack of the Clones. And I don't hear them saying like, yeah, he was a weirdo at first, but then he got so hot. It's like literally all the way through they are just head over heels.
That's totally fair.
You know?
Yeah. And no, that's interesting.
Something about the way he kills those Tusken Raiders, I guess, you know?
I did see a TikTok that said like it was funny because it was a woman saying this is like, ladies, if he's obsessed with Anakin Skywalker, I don't care how cute he is, run.
I saw that too, yeah.
Which, no, but like I've seen a bit of that too, and yeah, I mean, I guess it's just like he's a rebel and he will. I mean, to his credit, like he's not necessarily in much of a position to do this because Padme is set up to be a pretty independent character, but I think. Again, weird for two guys to talk about this, but let me just spitball for like 10 seconds.
Okay.
I think maybe there are some women to some level, like maybe it's like a little subconscious, who just like the idea of this guy would be willing to execute a whole town of people to protect you.
Right. Yes. I've heard that exact
that's thing. I guess that's just what it comes down to, is even as long as it's theoretical and doesn't actually happen, except in the movie it actually happens, which is why it's weird that Padme falls. But the idea that there would be a guy who theoretically would massacre an entire town for your well-being, there's something about that.
Yeah, no, there's that exact quote from a woman that I know that literally said, his story is tragic, but it's romantic in a tragic way because he's willing to do evil things to protect you. And it's like, okay, that's understandable, but I think that at the same time, it's still weird for these things that he starts out with in this movie. Like, he's not protecting Padme by giving that weird smirk. You know what I mean?
No, he's not. I mean, I get this has to exist somewhere, and maybe one day I would. If someone said, hey, this is really interesting, you should read it, I would. There has to be some kind of feminist critique of this movie that, like, talks about the like objectification side of Anakin's approach to this whole situation. Like someone's got to have delved into that somewhere. And I mean, to me, that there is sort of an element of that is relevant, because it's one of those character situations where Anakin essentially does everything wrong and gets what he intended to get anyway.
Right.
That just seems like, well, it also seems like young boys can take the wrong message away from that.
Exactly.
Which, like, if I want to pick, look, the racism in Episode 1 is a lot worse. If you want to pick something that's like an actual problem in this movie, I would argue it's that. I would argue it's there's a lesson. The romance here provides a lesson that is not good for boys the age that we were when we watched this movie to internalize.
I definitely took a lot of inspiration from Anakin when I was younger, and it did not work in my favor.
Yeah, if you're a parent or something, or you know any kids, make sure, like, if they ever watch Star Wars, it's very clear that Anakin is not going about this the right way, because the text of the movie certainly does not tell you that. In fact, like, the other thing that I thought was weird about the romance, because again, this is like a Padme side problem. I mean, obviously Anakin is a deeply flawed person in this regard and should be accountable for his own behavior. You know, I'm certainly not going to deny that. But again, I think if you're looking at it from like a character motivation perspective, why is Padme into him? There's not even
Again,
something like,
pedophile.
well, Jesus Christ. Like, yes, he is her protector. And I guess, yes, he did save her from the bugs. But, you know, at least in a lot of movies, if they're kind of doing like a romance, but it's not really well developed, there is an element of like, oh, there's like the rescue and the woman who needs to be saved and stuff. Like, the only time Padme nearly got taken out is when she was asleep and someone used like subterfuge to get at her. She didn't need Anakin's help dealing with the execution, the you know the tiger thing, in the arena. So the thing that the movie just never gets around to doing is giving Padme a reason to be attracted to him. Like they fundamentally disagree about core ideology. You know, maybe you can date someone with opposite politics to you, but they like fundamentally disagree about the world in a lot of important ways, I would say. They basically have nothing like what is their unifying connection? I guess
They don't have chemistry.
they're both headstrong, I guess, like in their own way. Like Padme, you know, decides to go and rescue Obi-Wan. Anakin never wants to follow the rules. I guess they have that. And I
But
mean, I wouldn't even say necessarily they don't have chemistry, but from like a like there has to be either a reason for them to fall in love, or if the movie's going to present it as like they're not really in love, this is just like kind of a passion thing. There has to be something that drives that passion, but there just isn't ever. Like they talk about sand. She's not like it's not even like she's like fawning over him because he's a Jedi or something. I don't know. It's just like it's so weird that Padme falls in love with this guy. Like I just have never no one's ever been able to explain why that happens.
you're dodging my explanation. She's always been in love with him ever since he was a kid. She groomed him. She's a pedophile.
Can you groom someone you didn't see for a decade?
Yeah.
You
in that first movie, she's like,
I
my care
guess.
for you will remain no matter what happens.
That's
Okay,
true, she does say that.
disclaimer. I
But
don't
it,
actually believe this. Just think it's really
but
funny.
there are many dumb interpretations of this, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough of the romance. What else do we need to handle with Attack of the Clones?
Well, I don't. Something I was gonna say. Something I was gonna mention is that you put a disclaimer out there for parents to let their kids know that when they watch this movie that what Anakin's doing is not the correct way to behave towards women. I think that's pretty clear by Revenge of the Sith. Like it's not clear by the end of this movie, clearly, but once Revenge of the Sith comes along and you see what Anakin turns into, I think that's kind of the overarching, like, oh, this was a mistake. This was not, like, he was not the person she thought he was. That can be the teaching moment for those kids.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
And
That was more of a joke.
yeah, but it is something to consider, and I think we're probably wrapping up on Clone Wars, not Clone Wars, on Attack of the Clones, anyways. So I thought that would be a good way to maybe start transitioning a little bit to Revenge of the Sith. But if you have any closing statements on Attack of the Clones,
Not that this night needs to be a highlight, but I watched a hilarious video the other day explaining why the Republic strategy at the Battle of Geonosis was absolutely terrible. To basically just like launch a ground assault running straight through open sand dunes straight at the enemy fortress where they're marching an army of tanks out at you. Someone was just basically talking like, this is the worst strategy I've ever seen. Why are you possibly doing this?
it was their first fight. Clones hadn't been.
Yeah, that was the joke I was thinking. It was like, hey, the Jedi just became generals like yesterday.
Yeah.
The one other minor thing I have to point out, a scene that will always be hilarious to me. We haven't brought up. I think you just can't do it anymore. You can't talk about the prequels without at least mentioning the Darth Jar Jar theory, and Jar Jar being the one to bring up the clone, or to bring up the emergency powers that get the clone army out there. But the funniest thing to me, do you know what it is? Do you know what the funniest part of that whole setup is?
What?
It's when they're in the room talking about it and says, like, we need to vote the Chancellor emergency powers. But what senator would have the courage to do it? If only Senator Amidala were here. Rewind the movie about 90 minutes before. I haven't worked for a year to defeat the Military Creation Act to not be here when its fate is decided. I don't understand why they think that Padme would have done that. Like, I get that the stakes have been like raised, but I don't get it.
I don't think he genuinely would thought that. I think that was like that entire scene was manipulation on Palpatine's part to
Okay, yeah, I guess if you interpret it that way, and like that's bait to get Jar Jar to do it.
because he looks like he's overacting, and not just in like the sense that he's an actor overacting. Like I think his character was overacting in that scene.
Okay,
He was
no,
like looking
that's a
off to the
fair.
side.
That's a fair way to interpret it. That's a very fair. Also, the one other thing that I thought was kind of funny, that we haven't like mentioned at all, is C-3PO and his whole bit with the droid.
Oh,
It's funny to me for two reasons. One, it's funny that just like no one ever asked any questions about what the hell was going on there. And two, it is really funny that the movie goes out of its way to make sure that C-3PO doesn't get wrecked. Like, one of the Jedi blocks a bolt and only hits the head of the droid that, is on C-3PO's body. And Kit Fisto, instead of just destroying the droid, pushes him over in a way that conveniently allows him not to get destroyed. I just thought that was really funny. It's like, you don't even know that this. Why does that not phase you at all? Like, why is that? Hey guys, why does that one have a protocol droid head? And Anakin's like, hey, wait a second, don't I know that guy?
You know what's funny? Luke and I beat Attack of the Clones in Lego Star Wars like a week ago, and in that mission where it's the battle, it's the Jedi come down and it's the battle on the little gladiator arena in Geonosis. There's a part where they just have C-3PO's head lying there in the sand during the middle of the whole battle, and Luke found it and he went, "Where's 3PO? What happened?" And he was like, I was fighting all the droids, and he stopped fighting because he was looking at 3PO's head. And he's like, "Daddy, what happened?" And I was like, "I don't know, buddy, but come help me with Django."
That's great.
He was so devastated.
That's hilarious. Yeah, so Attack of the Clones, dumb, but kind of fun.
But more engaging and more fun in my opinion. Slightly
yes,
better.
Definitely some writing. It's like, to me, I almost feel like if there's like one core thing about Attack of the Clones, it's that it's a very typical second movie. It's mostly gear for the third movie, and itself doesn't have like quite as many essential elements. The only things that happen are the war starts and Anakin gets married. Two things that have to happen for the third movie.
Yeah.
Which actually, to its credit, for a sequel as part of a trilogy, it itself does have a beginning, middle, and end, I would say, which not all middle movies do.
Yeah, like I said, I think that it's structured actually surprisingly well. I think that the strongest thing that Attack of the Clones has going for it is that it is actually following a good structure and is paced really well. Despite the contents of that pacing and structure making no sense whatsoever and less sense than the previous movie, the fact that it actually is presented to you like a movie would be really keeps it engaging and enjoyable. But anyways, that's enough of clones.
Yeah. All right, Revenge of the Sith, the best of these three movies by a long shot.
The actual pretty good one.
Boosted by Clone Wars.
Yes, that's one thing we should mention is that while it is good on its own, it's actually like entirely like it's almost lifted from like a B tier movie to an A tier movie by its predecessor TV show Clone Wars, which I'm sure everybody that's watched Clone Wars knows this already and has this opinion. But it gives so much more context to everything that's going on in the movie and the characters and anything that was missing or was not as well fleshed out in this movie was fleshed out in the Clone Wars. It really benefits the movie.
So right out of the gate, I'm going to go for a potential hot take. I don't know how strongly you feel about this.
Okay.
The Clone Wars Anakin does flow into Darth Vader reasonably well, I think. You see him do some not great stuff in Clone Wars. He's definitely brash. He definitely uses violence more liberally than others do. All that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Clone Wars Anakin I can buy as like kind of a face of the war hero much more than I can Revenge of the Sith Anakin.
Interesting.
I don't know why. Like, I feel like like again and to his credit, Hayden Christensen better acting in this movie, also better writing, mostly, sometimes still not good, but
Mostly good.
this is a strong performance from him in a lot of scenes. But there's something about his performance and the characterization compared to the Clone Wars that just make him a little like they hang on to like the angst and stuff a little more than I think Clone Wars Anakin does.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes him seem like a bit like I think they're trying to make him not that, the Clone Wars influenced Revenge of the Sith, obviously, but I feel like Clone Wars Anakin is more naturally cool, but Revenge of the Sith Anakin, it feels like he's trying to be cool. I can't quite explain why I feel that way. There's just something about his attitude that maybe I just watching Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith back to back. I'm kind of conflating the two a little bit, but that's just something that I felt watching Revenge of the Sith again.
Yeah, I think that there definitely is a difference between Clone Wars Anakin and Revenge of the Sith Anakin. And sometimes that bothers me, but at the same time, I think Clone Wars Anakin is a better character overall. So it's hard for me to say I wish that they would have tied their characters in to each other better, because I actually like Clone Wars Anakin better and kind of wish
Oh, I
that.
don't. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say I don't know that I wish they had tied them in better. It was just something I noticed that hadn't really affected my viewing
Well,
until this
I
time.
I do, because it is a little clear to me when I watch the TV show and then when I watch the movie that there is a difference. Not a huge difference. I still think there's a lot of the core character that's still there. But it's kind of like what you're saying. There's almost like more of like a bravado and a confidence that comes from the Clone Wars Anakin that isn't as present in Revenge of the Sith. And you could, again, the TV show kind of gives context to that too, because it shows that the stage that Anakin is from the beginning of the TV show to the end is actually he's actually in a worse spot. He's dealt with traumatic things like Ahsoka leaving the Jedi Order, his trust being shaken in that way, and just the things that he dealt with around the end of the show that would kind of transition into him being the way he is in Revenge of the Sith. I just think that there's only so much you can do to make up for that difference when it's something that you're doing beforehand. Like if maybe the Clone Wars had been made first and then Revenge of the Sith had happened, it would have been possible. But if you're gonna make a character be different and more interesting in a show that takes place before the character has already been established, obviously there's only so much you can do to set up who that character is in the next movie.
You have to get to that end point, for the story, especially if you're Dave Filoni and you're taking it really seriously.
Right, right.
But like the funny thing, like to your point about like the show not being able to like set up Revenge of the Sith, the funny thing to me has always been about Revenge of the Sith is that the Tartakovsky Clone Wars does tie directly into it. In fact, I would argue it does so better with Anakin, because Anakin in that series is really angsty and is really treated, I think, much like his Attack of the Clones self, but with a more like tool set of skills rather than the flip side, which is, and I mean, I guess they kind of assume that because there are definitely elements of Clone Wars Anakin in Revenge of the Sith. He's the brash one who's dealing with, has no problem dealing with the fighters, is able to, do all this flashy stuff in the ship that Obi-Wan's like not really able to totally keep up with. He's the one jumping in and out of elevator shafts. He's the one beating Dooku. He's the one doing all this. He's the one landing the crashed ship. He's definitely capable of having that like cool customer approach and that combination of daring and confidence. But it's just funny to me that they're like the lesser known Clone Wars cartoon does actually tie into the movie and feels like a direct setup for the movie, whereas the one that is now kind of known as the canon source, they basically have to kind of explain like, oh yeah, this other stuff is happening at the same time that stuff is happening over there that you saw in the movie.
Yeah, we should actually get into the meat of the movie.
Yeah.
Too. So something I found pretty funny on this watch of the prequels is that my perspective shift that I did with the first two movies very quickly stopped with this movie. Trying to look at this movie as like a silly, don't take seriously, fun adventure movie did not work. And I think that's actually a strength of the movie, is that this time it manages to take itself seriously in a way that's believable. And not just because it's darker, but also because I think it's structured well, like Attack of the Clones, but what the things that are happening make more sense, and there's higher stakes. The performances are better all around, especially like we were saying earlier. Natalie Portman knocks it out of the park in this movie, in my opinion. Even Anakin, like any complaints that people initially had with Hayden Christensen's performance, I think weren't present here in this movie. He really like ups the ante with his emotions. I think that, but for the most part, all the performances and the scenes and the dialogue are better, with a few exceptions. There's still hints and moments of like the previous slop from the first two movies existing in this movie. Like, for example, the romance between Anakin and Padme is still kind of like cringy and just kind of silly. Like when they're talking on the balcony about how in what way Anakin is in love with Padme, and like how,
Oh god, that scene sucks.
So love has blinded you. It's so silly.
It's funny because it's like bad flirting on Padme's part, because she like very. I don't understand. Sorry, I started interrupting,
That's okay.
but I just have to mention something on that scene. I don't understand the direction of that scene, because it's very clear that that's supposed to be like a flirty joke, but her face goes dead serious. I've never understood why that was like that. Like, because if you're gonna do that, you should say it with a smile, so it's clear that you're both in on this joke you're doing. That's what flirting is.
Yeah.
I've never understood why her face goes dead serious when she delivers that line.
And there's another scene, one that I didn't really notice until this last rewatch, but when Obi-Wan first sees on the cameras, or whatever they're called, the records, that Anakin is killing young ones, it's a very muted expression than one I'd expect from Obi-Wan, learning that his Padawan, or former Padawan, like his close friend, like was killing children. Like he looks at it and he goes, "It can't be," and he goes, "I can't watch anymore." And then, like, that was it. Like I would have expected a lot more in that scene from Obi-Wan. I think it's just one of the rare exceptions where Ian McGregor didn't really deliver that well. It probably wasn't even his fault.
Yeah, I think the idea is just that, especially with Yoda present, like he's just trying really hard to keep it together and to like not be like too emotive about it. That's why I think like at the very end, after he quote unquote not quote unquote, I was gonna say quote unquote kills, but let's just say after he beats Anakin, like his yelling there, I think, is him finally letting that outpouring go that has been building up essentially since the moment you just described.
Yeah.
He's been really repressing all that and trying to be himself and his cool self throughout the entire thing, and then that moment is where he finally just lets it go and really goes. So I can see what you're saying. I think that was just him like really trying to keep it together.
That's a good. Yeah, I can see that person. That's a good explanation for that.
The one thing that I thought. So look, I don't want to get into like timeline nonsense here. Again, if you factor in Clone Wars, I think it makes a little more sense. I'd have to go back and remember what was going on. But when Anakin gets back on the planet, they have that whole thing about like he says something like, you know, if the Chancellor hadn't been kidnapped, I don't think they would have brought us back from the Outer Rim sieges. So how long were you gone, and how pregnant is Padme? Like, I was thinking about this. This was bugging me throughout the whole movie this time. How long is the time frame of events? Because there are only a few options here. One, she's like 7 months pregnant, and you just didn't know because you haven't talked in that long.
Well, she did look pretty pregnant, so that could be the case. Also, she has
really?
the baby at the end of the movie.
Did you? Well, that's my point. How much time is it from the beginning of Sith to the end of Sith? It doesn't seem like it's that long, but to be honest, you know, you said she looked pretty pregnant. I felt like she didn't. That's what made me question it, actually. Well, it doesn't look like she's that pregnant, but you guys haven't seen each other in many months.
In my opinion, she looked pretty pregnant, but also still fit, if that makes sense. She didn't have a lot of the features of a late pregnancy, as in like women naturally get a little bit more round. I don't want to be offensive.
No, but but like the reason I bring it up is just because again, I'm not like we don't want to say anything weird. I'm just saying the timeline of the movie caught me as a little odd because they've apparently been separated for some length of time, and yet by the end of the movie she's having the kids. But I do think it seems like it might be implied that they're prematurely born because they have to save them before she dies. It's not like she
Yes.
was giving birth, in the way that you would normally do. But that was just something that caught my attention. I was like, it feels like a week goes by and she went from I'm pregnant to, oh, here are the kids.
I
I
guess
mean, obviously she knew that, but I just thought that was notable.
I guess it is interesting because she didn't look super pregnant in the very first scene she was in,
Exactly, that's what I'm
where she had to
saying.
tell him that he was pregnant.
So how long of a stretch of time is that? Because it feels like a week.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, that's not really important. What's much more important is all the other stuff.
Things that were excellent about this movie is that it just felt like an upgrade, you know? Like when it comes to the structure, again, like we've been going over the last three movies, like it had a great opening of 20 minutes to establish what the rest of the movie is going to be about. And it was immediately action packed and engaging. There was a setup, there was a call to action from the heroes. There was a B story again with Obi-Wan and Utapau. There was raising stakes in the midpoint when he discovers that the Emperor is a Sith. There's the one thing that I think is kind of different about this movie that I don't think it breaking from the structure in this way harmed it. I think in fact it made it kind of unique. Is that when the point of the movie where all is lost and you get to the darkest point, that basically lasts the entirety to the end of the movie. There's no resurgence, really. There's no point where the good guys come back and win. It's like they reach that end point where the all is lost, the bad guys close in, you're at the darkest point, and then it just kind of keeps going. There's just more dark shit, more bad shit happening, more things falling apart. And obviously that's the nature of the film because that's literally what's happening in the universe is that everything's falling apart. And there's really no moment where it kind of comes back, where everything happens and there's a resolution and it's more of a bittersweet ending in that way where it's like dark stuff happened and dark stuff stayed and like this is a dark ending, but also in this dark ending there's a little bit of light with the babies that were born and where this story is going to go based off of the original trilogy. Like this is a really dark film the way that it ends. It's a really somber, sad experience, but there's like this kind of hint at the end that's like, but remember the original trilogy? Remember how much fun that is? That's what's going to happen after this, so don't worry about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do think it's funny. Like, there's something sort of clever about it in the sense that like that darkness can be felt regardless of like you can take many different angles, but the emotion still lands correctly. And what I mean by that is like if you take a person who knows like almost nothing about Star Wars and you sat them down and you had them watch the movies in narrative order, that the end of Revenge of the Sith would seem like some measure of victory in a sense because well, not really, because I mean it's clear that Anakin survives, but like there's not even a catharsis in the idea that Obi-Wan might have beaten Anakin. Again, even if I'm assuming you know nothing about Star Wars. If you know about Star Wars, obviously you know that he's not dead. But in that moment, that's like a victory. Like Obi-Wan defeats the darkness that he set out to defeat. In fact, I mean, he thinks that he killed him.
Right.
But that's such a tragic end that it doesn't break away the emotion at all. Like there is no good way to read the ending other than what you just said about the hope of the following trilogy. And there's something kind of impressive about that to me. Like no matter where you kind of come in on this story, if you're watching it chronologically or if you're a fan who's watched it in like the release order, the weight still is there. And that's one of the and if there's something about like this movie that really stands out as like what its value is, to me it's the fact that I can watch the movie knowing everything's gonna be all right in the end at some point, and the tragedy still plays well.
Yeah.
Prequels just struggle with that kind of stuff where if you know the outcomes of things, then how do you like invest seriously? Because you already know who lives and who dies because some people appear in the later things and some people don't. And yet if you can build a tension that lasts even for people who know what's going to happen. I think that's the mark of a prequel that's found success. And the other thing I'll say, like, if you're a Revenge of the Sith skeptic, you might argue, well, that's only watch the prequel, or you watch the Clone Wars, so you understand the stakes and the human cost of this. But the movie on its own doesn't do that, and I can see why I care a lot more about Order 66 because I've spent more time with Plo Koon and stuff than
And the
the
clones.
casual. Than Plo Koon, never forget.
Yeah.
One of the greats. Equal in power to Master Yoda, according to
Got
some
shot
sources.
down in a ship.
Yeah, because you know why? Because they couldn't hang with he had a lightsaber. Because that guy could match Yoda in lightsaber skills and use Force lightning.
Right. And my Star Wars D&D character had to fucking go and shoot him out of a ship. No one's gonna
Yeah,
get that, but made you laugh.
what was I going to talk about? Oh, so like I can see you making that point. Like, why would you care about these random Jedi that the casual fan barely knows? I understand that, but to me, the weight around Anakin and Obi-Wan is enough to bring that home, even if you're a casual fan and you've only seen the movies. Now, if you're like us and you're fans of the expanded universe, the toll is so much heavier because you know these Jedi and because also you know the clones and you understand the relationship that's been constructed there. That is something that the movie does not get much time to do and does not put much effort in doing, and is, in my opinion, the one of its probably core flaws that I would point out is it's pretty simple. When one side is all droids and the other side is all clones, the stakes of the war are going to be a hard sell.
Yeah.
And I do think the movie doesn't deliver on that, but Clone Wars has picked up that slack probably more than anything else. That's its value, is it makes the war matter. The war in this movie, the action is cool, it's fun to watch. I think there's some good stuff, there's some good CGI, there's some good action. The stakes of the war don't really go that far. And that's why I would say the middle of the movie is not as good, in my opinion. The beginning scene has the kind of daring action adventure component still, and you see kind of the first signs of that trailing off. You see, Palpatine manipulating Anakin to kill Dooku and that kind of stuff. And then the end of the movie, once the dam breaks, is great. But the middle part of the movie where you're kind of hanging out in the war and the manipulations going on are still kind of interesting, and a couple times really interesting, like the whole opera scene. But there's just something
Yeah.
about it where if you're not a fan of the Clone Wars, I can look back and say the middle of the movie might kind of lose your interest because the war is not that interesting. So the scenes where the war itself is the focus do not last. And that's also partially because as longtime fans, you know that this war is a shell game anyway.
I do really, really like the Darth Plagueis scene, though. I think that whole scene is like such a great. There's so many things happening in that scene, and it's like a very believable seed to plant into Anakin for him to start his descent to the dark side. Like, obviously, we've seen scenes where he does things that are not the Jedi way, where he kills the Tusken Raiders, or even him killing Dooku in the beginning of the movie kind of seemed like a step in the wrong direction. But actual like beginning to question his own ideology in being a Jedi and wondering how he can save Padme and actually contemplating turning to the dark side based on what Palpatine is telling him right in that moment. And that was before Palpatine had even shown his hand, really, I would say the middle of the movie is the weak point of the movie, but I wouldn't even say it's that weak. There are parts that I think are very engaging, like when Anakin decides to rat out Palpatine and tell Mace Windu, and then that scene where he's being told to stay there where he is and have Mace Windu handle it, and his conflict. You're not told anything in that scene. There's no one saying anything, but you can see Anakin looking out to where he knows Padme is, and you can see Padme looking out to where she knows Anakin is, and it's just there's that like chorus of people, like that like woman like having that like really ominous like chant, not really a chant, but like the what I'm talking about, the
Yeah, it's like an opera kind of
yeah,
thing.
that like opera kind of like sound, and like you can just see him crying, and it's almost like in that moment you can see Anakin realizing that he is going to go down this path, and Even after that, he tries to fight it. And it's a very believable fall to the dark side. Some say it's rushed. Some say it's like kind of out of nowhere, and I really disagree with that because even if you don't think the previous movies are good, there's still context there that you can be given to understand where Anakin is at this point, you know? And even more so in the Clone Wars. To me, those scenes are very engaging. I'd say the only scenes that aren't really that kind of like put a stop in the momentum a little bit are the scenes right after the opening where they're discussing Anakin's role in the council and maybe Obi-Wan on Utapau. But even then,
I think it goes on a little long.
it goes on a little long, but it's a lot more engaging than the first two movies. Like
No,
hands
that's
down.
true.
Like there's never a point in Revenge of the Sith where I'm like I'd rather be like I think to myself like or I look off in the room I'm in and like observe something on the table and then I'm like oh yeah I have to go back to watching Star Wars. Revenge of the Sith grabs me the whole way, even at the points that are weaker, which I think is a huge strength to that movie.
Yeah, that's fair. There are a couple things you said that I wanted to hit on. You're talking about the arresting the Chancellor stuff. One of the things that I observed that was really funny there is like, so he tells Mace Windu, "Hey, I think Chancellor Palpatine's the Sith Lord," and he's like, "Okay, you stay here. We're gonna go get him." Given that they were already going to like arrest the Chancellor, can you imagine being one of the other three guys on the ship that Mace Windu has to tell that to? It's like, hey guys, so just got word that we're going to arrest the Chancellor. He's actually the Dark Lord, so hope you brought your A game today because we're in for a bad time.
Kit
Like
Fisto, stay behind me. You're the strongest among us. He's gonna try to kill you
yeah,
first.
that's gotta be sad news because they thought they were just going to arrest some old man, and it's like, nope, this is the Lord of Darkness. So hopefully everyone got a good sleep and had your morning coffee because we're gonna need your best, otherwise we're all gonna die.
Also, fucking A, either Mace Windu is like leagues above the other Jedi on the council, or George did them dirty. Like,
I think George did them dirty. I think George was trying to sell the Palpatine's power. I think he overplayed his hand a little bit because yeah, those
he
guys get
immediately kills two of them.
absolutely punked.
Yeah,
It's depressing.
he immediately kills two of them, like, right away.
Yeah, so I think he was trying to power scale Palpatine there a little bit.
Some,
Which that
yeah,
was another duel that duel is pretty good. There are some cool parts of it, especially when you know the context of Mace Windu's fighting style and stuff.
right, yeah.
That is another duel that has just like why shoot their faces ever? Show me the moves. Like let me see the moves that they're doing. Stop cutting to their faces glaring at each other. I know they're glaring at each other. What else would they be doing? I got so sick of that.
I also always got the impression in that scene that Palpatine was staging that entire thing. Like, maybe the reason...
He was not.
Well, I always got the impression that he was. I know maybe he wasn't. Maybe... I think maybe that possibly that perspective takes away from Mace Windu's ability a little bit. But the point where he's force lightning Mace Windu and it's going back on him and he's begging Anakin for help and he's like I'm too weak, I'm so weak, and then finally Anakin cuts off Mace Windu's arm and Palpatine immediately like smiles and goes power. It's almost like a moment where you're like, oh, he was staging this a little bit. Like he
Well, I don't know. Yeah, like, sorry, I was like gonna say like I don't know if staging is the right word. He's definitely selling it. Like he's going out of his way to sell the fact that he needs help or he's going to lose. I think he genuinely was gonna lose, but he made a point to look like a baby while doing it. Whereas if Anakin wasn't there, I think he would have died with like dignity, I guess.
I think that is probably the case, but I also like my perspective because the Emperor is supposed to be this omnipotent dark side lord, that he saw this happen and he wanted it to happen that way because it would solidify Anakin's turn to the dark side. Him having to interfere and basically kill Mace Windu and would make it so that he had gone past a point of no return, and at this point would be like, all I care about now is saving Padme, and if that means I have to become a Sith and betray all my ideals, then that's what I'll have to do. And that Palpatine had seen that already happen, and so that's how he wanted that to play out, you know? But again, it probably is the case that Mace Windu outdueled him, because I feel like my perspective kind of is reductive of Mace Windu.
I just know that the novelization and other like sources that make reference to it spell out like pretty clearly that Mace just overpowered him.
Oh, okay.
The thing that I'll say that, like, because you mentioned earlier, like, people say Anakin's turn to the dark side is rushed. Upon this rewatch, I definitely didn't feel like it was rushed. The thing that I will say, though, that I kind of noticed is there are two motives for him that stand very well individually, but feel weird kind of taken together. And what I mean by that is, like, he's got two things, right? One, he wants to save Padme. That part's pretty straightforward. He's having nightmares about her dying in childbirth.
Just like his
He had
brother.
yeah, he had visions of his mom dying. Whoops, she died. So it makes sense he doesn't want that to happen. Then there's the second part, which is he's growing distrustful of the Jedi. He feels like they don't respect him. He feels like they're hiding things from him. He doesn't like being asked to spy on the Chancellor. He thinks that he should be, more powerful than he is, so on and so forth. That also makes sense, like, in its own right. The thing that I noticed that just kind of struck me as odd is, like, it feels like when he finally crosses the point of no return, he's kind of bouncing between those two things in a way that feels a bit odd. Like, he's on his knees saying, like, I will do whatever you ask. Like he doesn't step in to kill a Jedi until he feels like he has to because he wants to save Padme. That's why he kills Mace. He doesn't say, Mace, I'm going to kill you because you don't trust me and you've been a dick to me since I've been here. I guess you could maybe argue that's a part of it, but I don't feel like that's spelled out about saving Padme in that moment. But yet, by the time he stands up from kneeling, he's like, yeah, Jedi, fuck Jedi, I hate those guys. It's like, this can be like, I'm not saying it has to be one or the other, but do you get what I'm saying? It feels weird that, like, both of those things would it's like a Jekyll and Hyde thing, except both of them are both evil, like they're both evil. I don't know how to explain it. Do you get what I'm saying? I don't know if
Yeah,
I'm explaining this well.
no, I get what you're saying. I feel like that maybe it all culminated in that moment where he is becoming Palpatine's apprentice, and part of that I think is him realizing that he has to be fully into this at this point. He basically was the reason why Mace Windu was killed. He is in front of the Dark Lord of the Sith right now. He can't reject him. He can't say, well, what if we just do this? He's in a way he's forced.
Force pushed him out the window. He's
Yeah,
standing right there.
Okay, but
I'm kidding.
He could have done that, but then how is he going to save Padme? That's his biggest catalyst at that moment.
Yeah, I know.
So to get what he needs from the situation, which is making sure Padme doesn't die in childbirth, he needs to fully commit to being a Sith. He needs to abandon all of his ideals beforehand and fucking murder younglings, murder children, which I want to expand upon real quick. I think the one moment where Revenge of the Sith steps over its bounds a little bit and does something that I don't think was necessary was showing Anakin murdering children as detailed as they did. You can explain maybe that Anakin killed children in like like if Obi-Wan watched the records or something, or there was like a panel
Yeah, or
shot.
they found the bodies and said this child was killed by a lightsaber.
Right.
I mean, duh. There's only two people that would do it.
Right, because I'm watching a movie, it would make me far enough away from the situation that I believe he has a chance at redemption. But they really, that scene where he walks in and ignites the lightsaber in front of a frightened kid, that image alone makes it really hard for me as a fan of Star Wars and a fan of the Darth Vader character to ever truly believe that he can be redeemed or has good in him, which is supposed to be the entire arc of the whole saga. Is that Anakin turns to the dark side and tries to snuff out all of his light, but it gets brought back at the very end by his son. That arc, to me, would have been better if they hadn't had that scene. Because that scene makes it really difficult for me to ever fully believe that Anakin should be welcomed back into the light side, or that he ever redeems himself in the end of the 6-movie saga. You know what I mean? Do you feel that way?
I'm not gonna say that like I 100% disagree, but that scene is also cold as hell, and I love it. Like that's I don't know, there's something about like I just want to embrace like I want to be able to, I don't know how to say it, but like if this guy's gonna embrace the hate, like I want them to play their cards. I don't want them to dick around with what this means.
Well, no, I'm not saying he doesn't kill children. If from a narrative
But I know
standpoint,
what you mean. But I know what you mean. Like if you can isolate yourself from that reality a little bit, it helps you as a viewer. I
yeah,
totally see that.
like
The thing that I'll say, one thing that I'll say about that though, just to put like a spin on it, one of the things that I thought was really funny upon this rewatch that I didn't really think of before is right after he turns when he's like, "Because the council didn't trust you, my apprentice, you are the only Jedi with no knowledge of this plot." I'm thinking, really, Anakin? You're gonna believe that they told the 9-year-olds about the plot to overthrow the Republic, but not you? Like, obviously, his mind is twisted. I totally get it. It's not a real criticism, but it was just a funny way to think about. Like, yeah, they had a meeting where they told the younglings, "Okay, kids, time to practice killing the Senate. You know, everyone get your lightsabers out." It's like.
I also don't believe he was saying that to make Anakin believe that was true. I think Anakin knew that wasn't true, but he was so deep in it that they kind of had to roll.
No,
play it,
yeah,
you know?
like I said, totally not a real criticism at all, but just something that made me like chuckle a little bit. That I thought was a funny way of interpreting the scene.
A really funny meme that I just thought about. I can't remember when I read it or who I read it from, but it was a meme of Palpatine like kind of like updating Anakin on Order 66 and being like, "Okay, you killed all the Jedi at the temple. Cool. We'll just take the younglings and like train them and make them Sith for the future battles." And he went, "You did what?" Like even Palpatine was like shocked by his decision.
That would have been that would almost have been funny if that were like a canon version where Palpatine was like,
Yeah,
"No, like."
He's like,
I
"Don't
mean,
worry, round up the younglings. We'll make them Sith. We'll add them to our army."
I admire the bloodlust, but do what I tell you. Stop going like so overboard.
Yeah.
Follow my orders. I have plans. The thing that I was gonna say about that too is I was talking earlier about how like if you don't care about the Jedi from the Clone Wars, like the impact won't have as much on you. So even though you're not someone who believes this, since we're talking about these movies and since we're talking about Order 66, I have to do my Order 66 thing, even though it's not like, even though you're not a person who has this opinion. I have
Okay.
to do my Order 66 thing because there are some individuals out there on the internet and YouTube and stuff who like to talk about how introducing more surviving Jedi makes them wonder why Order 66 mattered if there are these surviving Jedi.
Oh yeah.
I got news for you. 99% of the Jedi are still dead. I'm sorry that the genocide wasn't 100% successful. I feel like to if you want to talk about how that nerfs the impact, I feel like you're looking for ways to criticize when there's plenty of stuff you can criticize without digging for stuff like that. You know, there were some sailors that survived Pearl Harbor. I wouldn't go up to any of them and be like, "Hey, since some of you survived, why should I care about all the ones that died?" You'd be a huge asshole if you did that. So, like, all these people are like, "Well, Balin survived. There's another Order 66 survivor." It's like they went from 10,000 to like 100. Still pretty bad. Just had to get that out because I hate that argument so much.
That poor Pearl Harbor parallel was great.
Oh, the first one, the real one I wanted to do was not Pearl Harbor.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I understand. I think I know what direction that
Yes.
other one is.
So let's move along. I just had to get that out since we're talking about Order 66.
Something I feel like I have to bring up, even though we'd probably discuss it more in the Clone Wars video whenever we make that, it's the inhibitor chip discussion. So while I'm not a hater of the inhibitor chips, like I've seen some people be online, something that I think was a lot more emotionally impactful to me in this movie, and even watching the Clone Wars thinking that this was the direction it was going to eventually take, was that Order 66 was something that the clones always knew about. And it's basically directly stated in Battlefront 2, the original Battlefront 2, that this is the direction it was originally supposed to be taking, before they changed it to the inhibitor chip thing, was that that's what it was, is that the clones always knew about Order 66. They always knew that eventually, one day, they would be ordered to kill the Jedi. And that despite, their camaraderie and despite their friendship and despite their respect of the generals. And again, this wasn't entirely fleshed out in Revenge of the Sith, but I remember watching early episodes and early seasons of the Clone Wars and seeing all these episodes that were surrounded around like the clones like fighting for justice, and the Jedi being the leaders and the leadership of these armies. Specifically, do you remember that episode that was supposed to be like a prequel to the Clone Wars movie, where there was a clone that like betrayed the Republic and worked with Asajj Ventress and separatists?
Yeah.
That episode for me was like, oh, this is foreshadowing. This is foreshadowing that there is the possibility that in the future, what we already know because of Revenge of the Sith, that these clones will be ordered to turn on the Jedi and they will obey. And they won't question it, despite the connection that the clones have formed with the Jedi for the entirety of the Clone Wars. That they are just going to, on a dime, because they have always known that this was going to happen, or this was an option, on a dime turn on all these Jedi and kill them. That was such a fascinating thing for me to contemplate while watching the early seasons of the Clone Wars and watching them watch the context be given that they were so close as a unit, the Jedi and the clones. And even in Revenge of the Sith, it was still impactful, even though it wasn't nearly as fleshed out upon. It was still impactful to me because, in the end of the second movie of Attack of the Clones, they come and save the Jedi, and they're the reason the day is saved. And then in the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, it's directly in the Clone Wars where they're working with them, they're flying ships with them through space, and they're working with Obi-Wan on Utapau to stomp out the remaining separatists. And then Order 66 happens, and in the movie specifically, it really does just seem like Cody always knew it. Like, there wasn't like a struggle like there was in the show when the inhibitor ships were canonized. But there was, in the movie, it was just like Cody saw the transmission and then was like, okay, we'll be done. Boom, kill Obi-Wan. That was so much more impactful to me. And even though I don't hate the inhibitor chip idea, I think that the way that the inhibitor chip was executed within the Clone Wars show was really well done. And it was still very emotional and impactful. I will always kind of a little bit wish that they hadn't done that, because what was always more harrowing and impactful to me was the clones always knowing in the back of their heads, despite the friendship they were forming, were always going to be always going to know that was the order they would have to obey.
So let me ask you this then, because you and I have talked a little bit about this before, and I was actually reading a Reddit thread about that very thing today as I was kind of just looking at the lay of the land for, I was just curious about prequel discourses that exist out there that maybe I hadn't thought of, things like that. And I saw a thread about this very topic, and one of the things that like people were talking about, and I'm curious what you think, is like the thing for me has always been like humanizing the clones is like one of the core values of the Clone Wars, because they're not given much characterization in the movies, and the Clone Wars builds off that and the Clone Wars literally spends its first episode explaining to you that the clones are characters. Like, yeah. That's half of what the episode is about, is explaining to you that the clones are characters and will be like regarded as characters throughout the duration of this show. And the thing for me is, like, if you're gonna go through the process of humanizing them, it would feel weird to do that while also expecting them not to have human responses to Order 66 unless they were compelled to do so. Like, there is something interesting about, like, the nefariousness of it all. I definitely agree with that. But the point that someone made was basically just, like, it would be, in any situation, like, as a human being, you can imagine it would be a really hard sell to form a battlefield brotherhood with someone over the course of several years, be told to turn on them, and then have like 100% compliance rate on that. Like that would be weirdly, that wouldn't feel as natural as it seems like it might, because of what the Clone Wars has done. Now, I think it would be interesting if there were an idea of, the only way clones got out of it essentially is if they were able to somehow get out of the inhibitors, whether it's like the Bad Batch guys or Captain Rex or whatever. Like there was some way out of it. But I feel what that person was saying does resonate with me a little bit too. The idea that if it was up to chance, the other point that they made was Palpatine simply would never leave that up to chance, like at risk. He would never, if he had the ability to make sure that the plan happened, he would do it. He wouldn't let this let these people build a bond over concerns that it would screw up his control, because the inhibitor chip is part of his overarching control of the whole situation. And anything that would break that control would be something that would be out of character for him to let happen. Like, his entire plan would essentially bank on these clone troopers will always love me more than they do, or always like have a loyalty to me above the Jedi, who are literally like saving their lives on a regular basis. So that was just, I can see both sides of it. Perspective that I thought was interesting was talking about like humanizing the clones makes it a hard sell to not use the inhibitor chips, because they wouldn't be having a human response to the thing that's happening. There had to be some workaround to force them to have that response while still treating them as humans.
Well, I'm not saying there would be 100% in this scenario. I'm not saying there would be 100% conversion rate. My interest was actually in the idea that like by the end of the show, Rex would go against the Order, and like it would show at the end of the like I always thought that the end of the show would be showing the clones that went against the Order. That would be the literal climax of the show, was seeing where those clone stories would go. Given that I was under the impression that they did know the whole time and there was no inhibitor chip, I was always thinking like, so what makes Cody lose his faith in Obi-Wan? Like what makes, at what point does Cody stop being a brother to Obi-Wan? Like, is there something that's going to happen where he kind of realizes, there's no way, like maybe he for most of the show would have been one of those clones that would have disobeyed the Order, but then something happens around the end of the show that he's like, no, I don't care anymore, and that's why he was so willing to kill Obi-Wan in the movie. And to me, like, a lot of the loyalty could be. I agree that Palpatine, it would make more sense that he wouldn't leave that up to chance, but a lot of the prequels don't make sense. So at that point, like, I think the more narratively satisfying, despite it making less sense for the character, would be that Palpatine would rely on the fear that the clones would have of him if they disobeyed. He is the Dark Lord of the Sith. I'm not saying he could literally take on the whole clone army, but there's a reason to believe the clones would be afraid of disobeying him, in the sense that there may be clones that are just straight up loyal to him and would see the clones that disobeyed as a traitor, which is something that they did do with the inhibitor chips, not because they were afraid, but because they were, with the inhibitor chips, they were forced to see Captain Rex as a traitor when he wasn't just killing Ahsoka outright in that last episode. So to me, it was like that, but on a grander scale. Like, we would see clones that just obeyed because it was the Order. Good soldiers follow orders. Like what's his name said in the Bad Batch, and there would be clones that would resist because of the brotherhood and the camaraderie that they had built up with the Jedi. But ultimately, there would be more clones that just had to remain loyal, either out of fear or just out of programming, like in the sense that they were brought up to be this way and to know that they were going to always turn. And I always point to that entry in Battlefront 2 which I know because it's like one of your favorite games, but that entry where the clones talk about knowing right before Order 66 is happening what was about to happen, and then basically like that guy saying, we all knew what was about to happen, what we were about to do, and nobody spoke up, nobody said a word. It was a silent trip the whole way there. And he's like, did anybody have doubts? I'm sure they did, but we followed orders. And like, to me, that's like, that's such an impact. That's so interesting and impactful, and there's so many like avenues you could take past that, like what I was saying earlier with the clones that did disobey and them having to basically fight against their brothers who did obey, and almost like a little mini like civil war in between the clones there you could have taken. To me, there was a lot of directions that I was excited about with that being the case. And again, I don't think the inhibitor chips was a bad direction to take. I think it was also executed very well, and it was very impactful and emotional. But there's a small part of me that always wished I could have seen where the other direction would have gone.
Yeah, no, I can see that, because I mean, yeah, that to the extent that you acknowledge that as like a source that I mean, you don't even have to acknowledge it as like canon or whatever. You can just be acknowledged as an interpretation that is a good idea. Because the part of the Battlefront 2 story that sticks out to me isn't so much that one; it's the one on Felucia, where they say that Ayla Secura personally saw them off, and she said they were the bravest soldiers that she'd ever seen.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
goes, "It's a good thing we were wearing helmets because none of us could bear to look her in the eye." Like they're
Yeah.
already laying the
Oh,
groundwork. That was before Order 66 was called.
I
The
know.
one you're
Oh
talking about
my
is
god.
after Order 66 was called. That Felucia one is the one that stuck with me as like the damn, like that's heavy.
Yeah, like
Um,
the idea that even the clone troopers that did obey would regret it afterwards, and the guilt they would carry. Oh, there's that. Like that gave me goosebumps when you reminded me of that.
well, I mean that guilt actually is touched on. Have you seen what if Bad Batch have you watched?
A little bit of the first season.
Not okay,
Mhm.
not so not because that guilt does get addressed.
Oh, okay. Shit, I should watch Bad Batch.
They're not like on a grand scale, but there are ways that that guilt gets touched on a little bit. But no, I see your point. The other thing that I was sort of thinking is just like I feel like obviously the movies don't indicate that the inhibitor chips exist. They don't make it obvious at all. I do think the movies do provide like an interpretation that allows for that though. Like again, if you humanize the clones, but you also kind of take the readings of the prequels literally. The Kaminoans say they're totally obedient, taking any order without question, which
Right.
seems a little contradictory to the idea of treating them as humans. I mean, the Kaminoans don't even see them as humans. They just see them as, I mean, they say they're superior to droids, but they're essentially just droids that can think
Right.
in their eyes.
But that raises a
Um,
lot of questions, you know?
No, and the other part of it too, and then I think we should get to a few more hits on this movie because it's getting late. Like with the idea of this, because you mentioned the Trader episode. I forget the name, but it's about Slick. Um,
Yeah.
with the episode about Slick, like I wonder how the lack of inhibitor chips and the idea that the basis of well, no, I guess it doesn't matter because if some clones don't follow Order 66, then some clones can just betray too. I was gonna say like, can you have characters like Slick while also leaving the Republic indoctrination to be organic? Because like to me, the existence of the inhibitor chip and the existence of traitorous clones who don't want to fight, like Slick or even Cut, the farmer guy,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter because their inhibitor chips would just activate in the moments that would be like loyalty would be commanded. Whereas I think if you rely solely on like Republic indoctrination, it makes those characters feel it makes it a little weird. You know what I mean? Like they have like the clones have entire free will up until the moment Palpatine essentially decides they don't. Whereas if they always like kind of have free will but not really, then it's like those characters I feel like are less. I don't know. I don't know if those stories would work quite as well. But I mean, I totally see what you mean. Like I said, I love the Battlefront 2 campaign. I love the idea that there's this nefarious plot going on the whole time, even though, like we were talking about the other day, the clone orders just always existed. So they at least always knew it was an option for sure. I can totally see it either way.
I always wondered what happened to Cut after the inhibitor chips went off. If like he left his
Uh,
family or something.
he's in Bad Batch at some
Oh
point.
shit! Damn it! I should watch that show.
I think he's in bed. Look, let me tell you, dude. Everyone and their mother who's still like alive and not a rebel makes an appearance in Bad Batch. I mean, they bring the band back together.
Shit! I should fucking watch that show. But
Yeah.
anyways, wrapping up Revenge of the Sith.
I'm trying to think if I have any other like important closing thoughts. Well, let's talk about the end a little bit more because one of the funny things that I always think about is the fact that I know Yoda quote unquote lost to Darth Sidious. Like undeniably he did because he wanted to kill him and he didn't.
Yeah.
But I would just like to point out for the record that Yoda fought in 2 duels in the prequel movies. And in both of those duels, the person he was fighting fought him for about 1 minute before they had to find a way to cheese their way out of the fight.
Yeah. Yeah. Yoda's
And
a
I just thought
badass.
that was just funny to think about. Like, imagine doing this, being like, okay, I need to get away from this guy, otherwise he might actually just beat me. And the other funny observation I had about the Yoda duel, Revenge of the Sith, is imagine going into work to the Senate the next day, walking into the room and being like, the
What the fuck
fuck happened in here?
Yeah.
Where's my desk? My desk got thrown down to the bottom, like, or my pod, whatever. I don't know what those things are called, but you know what I mean? That would have just been a weird situation. Like, why was there why was there a storm, an earthquake? Like, what happened in here? I would have been really concerned.
I something we haven't touched on yet is the fight scenes in Revenge of the Sith, which I think are both better and at times worse than the other two movies. I think that the Count Dooku fight in Revenge of the Sith is miles better than the one in Attack of the Clones. I think that the Sidious and Yoda fight I think is really good. Even though there's some silly stuff in that, like I find it kind of silly that Yoda just gives up. Like you're right, he does lose and he doesn't kill Sidious, but he could have just gone and picked up his lightsaber and like jumped back up.
No, you're right. Palpatine is hanging off the ledge. I know you just hit the ground. You're probably sore. Force push that guy. Like do something.
Pull him off.
Why did you give up? You have it. You have a chance. The fight is not over.
He was just like, I'm done. I give up.
I mean, you like yeah. He I think Sidious was probably just like that was demonstrating that he was a little stronger than him. Yoda was still holding his own, all right. I 100% agree. Yoda gave up way too soon.
Yeah, I think Yoda could have won. It was definitely Sidious had the upper hand, but they were pretty equal throughout.
Also, one quick thing: the way that Yoda kills the two guards is always funny to me because it doesn't look like that should kill them at all. But he boop boop and they just drop like they just got sniped. So great.
And that line from Yoda when Sidious tries to leave and he goes, "If so powerful you are, why leave?" Like that's such a badass line.
Yeah, Yoda actually kind of goes hard once he realizes that the dark side has won. He's not screwing around anymore. I kind of respect that.
I also really like the fighting style of Sidious. Like I think even though it's a little silly, and again the silliness works in this perspective. I was watching the prequels for the most part, but even though it's a little silly that he like spins at Windu and the Masters, I really like that like throughout his duels that he has. There's a lot of times where he tries to like stab at them. That's something that I like never saw before in fights very much. Where he, you know how he would like try to drive his lightsaber right into the guy. He did that a lot in his duels, and I felt like that reflected like someone that would be like a dark lord of the Sith really well. Like not even just like an evil person, but an evil manipulative person. He's always trying to get the killing blow like as fast as he can to really get it in there, you know?
Yeah. Palpatine's fighting style is pretty goofy, but his performance is also pretty goofy from a certain perspective. So you know what? I don't care. I think it fits.
Right.
Because he's so good in this movie. He is. Like he is chewing up the scenery like at Voldemort tier.
Yeah.
Like every moment he's on screen. It's great stuff. It's especially I mean, yeah, like once he turns the Emperor, maybe it's a little silly, but it's also like once you see Return of the Jedi and you understand that that's what the character is supposed to be, I feel like you either have to get on the train or you also have to like hate Return of the Jedi because it's not like you know there are a lot of dumb things in the prequels that Lucas like cut out of whole cloth from his mind that we don't know like where they came from. That was not one of the Emperor was always like a weird dude.
Yeah.
And
the end. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no! The one other thing I was going to say about the fighting that I thought of though is that just like these duels with Sidious are great, but the Maul Savage duel with Sidious is still my favorite because not only does he win, he annihilates them, and it's delightful.
Yeah, I mean, there are fights that aren't in the movies that I think are some of my favorites of all time, like the Obi-Wan versus Maul fight in Rebels. Like I haven't even watched most of that show, but that fight is one of my favorite fights of all time.
Yeah, I just love Sidious fights. Sidious fights are always great for that reason because he just loves. Again, there is almost no character I can think of who just loves how evil he is. Yeah. Darth Sidious, and that's what makes him so engaging to watch. I think we should talk about if there's one other thing we have to hit on. We have to talk about the main event of the whole trilogy, essentially, like literally what the entire thing was building to.
Right.
The Mustafar fight. So, Anakin, you're an idiot. The fact that you were like, "Oh, I love you, I want to protect you," and then immediately choked her out like 30 seconds later, you're an idiot.
Yes, but also I think he was thinking that like Obi-Wan was cheating on when she was cheating on him with Obi-Wan in
No,
that moment.
I think so. Which I don't even want to get into that because that's been a fan theory that people have come up with, and I don't like it.
I think there's
I mean,
some weight to it, but yeah, I don't think it
there's some
actually
evidence.
happened.
There's some evidence. The way he talks about her in Kenobi, I can't deny.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of something. But anyway, the one thing though that I thought was interesting is like, I guess it's not like explicitly stated, but I kind of feel like Obi-Wan, because he knows that the Separatists are on Mustafar. He heard that conversation because he was spying on Grievous. The fact that he doesn't even think about that and has to stow away on Padme's ship to see where she's going, I thought was kind of funny. I was like, can you really not figure this out? Like, what's like the one thing that they would do after all the Jedi are dead? There's only like one other power in the galaxy right now besides Sidious, and it's those people. I gotta say though, you want to talk about like, they show the younglings scene, but they kind of talk around that. They do not hesitate to show Anakin killing those Separatist dudes. He is slicing through limbs. It's violent in there. That place is a bloodbath.
Well, they've been evil. They've been the evil guys throughout the whole thing. So
No, and I don't feel any sympathy for them, but damn, like, man, that was just like, that wasn't just droids. Droids, you can do whatever you want. Those were organic life forms.
yeah, yeah.
The duel is famous for a reason. It is really long, and I do think again, you can make a case that there are some moments of it that are a bit over the top in terms of like, would like people who are fighting with pure emotions right now really be doing this? I'm not so sure. But it is epic, undeniably. It looks awesome still today with all the lava and stuff around it.
Yeah.
And the fact that they keep it fresh by not just having them fight in a room, but by altering the terrain and the location, does help keep the fight kind of moving along, even though it is like a really long battle. They're able to find ways to keep it fresh. And then the end is still both very tragic, but also 5% funny. I have the high ground. You're up on a hill elevated like 2 feet, and we're in a sword fight. Like, why? I don't understand. I've never totally understood why that happened. Like, obviously, Anakin was dumb to try to jump over him when Obi-Wan did what he did to stick his lightsaber up in the air, essentially.
Right.
I get that part, but I've never understood why George ended the fight that way. Like, I have the high ground.
Well, there was a Sam Whitaker, the guy who played Maul.
Yeah?
He had a pretty cool explanation, which was that there had been probably legend that Obi-Wan had beaten Maul that way, and that Anakin maybe tried to wanted to like show his power in that moment and show Obi-Wan that he could beat him that way. And Obi-Wan was like, don't even try it. And when Anakin tried it, Obi-Wan just sliced him up because he knew exactly how to counter the move that he had used in The Phantom Menace.
That's fair. I guess just my question would be, why did Obi-Wan even say, like, I have the high ground? It's like, what is that going to get you?
I don't know, but it's a great meme.
No, that is true. And I mean, and that explanation does make sense. Like, there is kind of, again, Lucas likes to do, like, parallel things like that. So yeah, Obi-Wan, like, knowing his own tactic is good. And then the burning and the no limbs and the burning, that was the thing that, like, obviously killing children is worse. I'm not going to pretend like it's not. But that was the moment that made me, like, a little bit like, ugh, geez, this is really dark.
I had to skip it because Luke was out there with me watching, and I had to skip that moment. So
that's a fair assessment. The movie definitely doesn't leave any card unplayed. You see a dude with 3 limbs gone, burned near to death.
all those metachlorians that he lost.
Speaking of which, let's talk about the very ending. I know it's a meme. And there, we've defended some things, we've criticized some things tonight. It's been a fun night. Darth Vader yelling no is actually not the worst thing in the world.
It's not the worst thing, but I think it was a little silly.
It's pretty silly. Yeah, I will say my defense for it basically boils down to the Darth Vader of the original trilogy should absolutely never do that in a million years. But that is a guy who has been sitting in his own suit of hate armor for 20 years. This Anakin, I know he's in the iconic Darth Vader outfit, but he's still the guy we just knew 10 minutes ago who was still deeply in love. So I'm not gonna begrudge that as much. It is pretty cliche, but I watched it this time and I was like, I feel like this is something that this person still would do. The person this guy will be 20 years from now would never do that and didn't do that, and thank God. But I was there and I was like, I don't think this like ruins Darth Vader for me at all. I think this is just who he is right now, and we have to recognize that he's like a different character.
I think a way they could have pulled it off better is him not like stumbling through his lines beforehand, where like if Sidious just went, unfortunately it seems in your anger you killed her, and then like there was like a shaking and like everything was breaking, and like he busts it out and like no noise whatsoever, didn't say anything, it was just like the force was crushing everything around him, and then he went no. I think that would have been a little bit more fitting, because it would have shown like this burst of anger from hearing that, and then just despair and sorrow, like kind of like his old self showing up after what he's become, basically, you know. But him kind of like stumbling across his words, and then that happening and him shouting no, I felt like kind of took a little bit of the, I don't know, it took away from the tragedy a little bit for me, and added some silliness to it.
Yeah, I can. No, I mean that's a fair point. It definitely is a little over the top.
Yeah.
The funny thing to me is just like, you know, we had the long running discussion about Vader and Anakin and who was stronger and so on and so forth. The funny thing to me is the weird way, because you know, we as like fans who kind of get into the lore understand that Palpatine was disappointed by what happened with Vader because he thought that Vader lost something like of his quality, because he knew Vader had all this potential, and he knew that that potential was undercut after he lost on Mustafar. That's just something that we kind of all accept as truth. And I mean, I think in expanded material, it is clearly demonstrated, from the Force Unleashed games to like the novels and that kind of stuff. It's pretty clear that there are people who want to kick it in that direction. So I thought it was funny watching him be like, this guy looks like actually a little sympathetic in this moment for what just happened to Vader. Like, he's down there on his knee, like checking on him.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That he's like, get a medic.
Himself.
It's like, I'm surprised Sidious didn't just like spit on him with the way we talk about like potential Vader versus actual Vader. I'm surprised Sidious didn't like slap his burns or something just to be an asshole.
Could you imagine?
That would be, dude. Darth Sidious is one of the most evil people on the planet. I wouldn't put it past him.
I know, but instead of like force lightning him on the ground or something, he just smack.
That would be so funny. I really want. Which, by the way, have you ever seen the? You might probably play this game. Did you ever see the alternate cut of the Revenge of the Sith game where you play as Anakin in the final battle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I played
that ending is so funny.
Yeah,
he kills Obi-Wan, and Vader's like, "Well done. Now we will rule the galaxy." And then it's just that's it. That's the whole. That's the fate of the galaxy right there.
Remember, I lent you that game, or I gave you that game.
Yeah, that was so long ago that I didn't even know if you remembered that scene.
No, I do. It was pretty silly.
Yeah, fun times. And then, you know, Luke and Leia are born. Luke gets sent to go live with his stick in the... Can you imagine if, like, Owen got his way and Luke never did anything with his life and the galaxy was just doomed forever because this one guy was, like, just a stingy jerk?
I need your help with this. The harvest is when I need you the most.
Yeah, I could go save the galaxy from tyranny, or I could farm moisture, whatever that means. Which, by the way, one thing that I don't know, we talked about this, I think, in the Star Wars stuff that we recorded and never actually posted. One of the things that I do feel like this movie needed, and this is probably the last like big thing I'll mention. We talked earlier about like the impact of the war and the clones versus droids thing of it all. The thing that that I'm glad for Star Wars to expand on with TV shows and stuff is the impact of the politics of the world of the average person, because we are following great exceptional heroes doing exceptional deeds in the Star Wars universe, as you would with most stories. But as someone pointed out in an interview of Revenge of the Sith, they circled a ship in the background and said, how did the rise and fall of the Empire, or the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, affect this guy? We don't know, because the movie doesn't really spend a lot of time with those kinds of people. And I appreciate that we're getting more content, even though not all of it is great, because I like knowing that. And I think this movie is probably the one where that was, like, a little more needed, because we talked in the Phantom Menace about like the show, like the just telling us what the politics are rather than telling a story with politics and letting people like understand it. And this movie's politics is definitely more insightful and more useful, even though everyone quotes that fucking line and thinks they're some genius. This is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. It's like, yeah, I saw the movie too. But anyway, I do feel like if there is a problem with the political messaging of Revenge of the Sith, it's that, again, I don't really feel the human impact of this transition as much as I wish I did. And the movie's plenty long. There's plenty of stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff they had to cut. In fact, stuff about the politics that was good. That whole delegation that was trying to get the Chancellor to give up his powers and stuff like that. But that was just something that I was just thinking about as one of the things that I noticed again this time, is that the expanded stuff is really helpful in delivering kind of the human element, because we're spending so much time with the heroes and villains that there's a galaxy of like a quadrillion beings out there that are theoretically being affected by all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I think like obviously you get the context of what it's like, what a galactic empire means in the original trilogy, but even then, I think there's a lot more focus on the adventure and the characters than the actual impact of like the setting. That it's good that we have that extra content coming out. Like I'm sure Andor, even though I haven't seen it, you've told me it really
Oh
focuses
God, it's the
and
best at that.
highlights yeah the galactic
It's the best at that.
oppression.
And if well, one of the funny things about that idea, though, is part of the reason I think that the governance, like one of the reasons I find the politics to always be divorced from the plot in the prequels and in a lot of the movies in general, is that half the important stuff happens on planets that are outside the government's attention. Like that might be part of the problem, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everything happens on frickin' Tatooine. There's no Republic on Tatooine. There's no Empire on Tatooine until they go there to chase the droid plans.
Yeah.
There's no government on Hoth. There's no government on Endor. There's no government on Jakku. There's no government. It just feels like that. A lot of that stuff wasn't really happening until recently. Which I think, honestly, speaking of like the expanded material that has come out in the Disney era, is a good place to close my thoughts about the Star Wars prequels. Because I said this to you the other day. It was one of the things that inspired me to put in the time to do this. Is maybe I would feel differently about this if I was born in 1970 or something. But like me today, as a millennial Gen Z, right on the bubble between those two. I was born in '96. I would much rather have the prequels and the sequels and the shows, for better and for worse, than if George Lucas and the other people who directed had just made 3 good movies and then just effed off forever and never tried again.
Yeah.
Like, I understand the like all the people who say like all this content like doesn't make them care about the mythos and a lot of it's not very good. I understand all that. But I saw a tweet today. I need to pull it up because it was really topical that I saw this today, and it really speaks to Star Wars and its unique benefits. It says Star Wars would probably be really good if it didn't suck ass, but at the same time, it wouldn't be nearly as good if it didn't suck ass. Yeah. You understand? That's a great summation of how I feel, because that is very true. The prequels, 2 of them are not very good, but they all still have a place in my life for their own reasons, and I honestly feel like if they had just made 3 good movies and never done anything, I feel like it would still be remembered, but I feel like it would be remembered more as like a cinema lesson, or like a cinema, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a piece of cinematic history, rather than like rising to the level of like a real lasting cultural
Yeah,
phenomenon.
yeah,
Um, and frankly, I think because the movies are divisive, there's a reason we all make 5 hour long. We're doing it now. There's a reason everyone wants to make a 5 hour long YouTube video talking about them, is because honestly, they're probably more interesting to talk about than if they were just decent movies that didn't have, any intrigue behind their creation process.
yeah. That was very well put. Uh, that was a good summary of how I feel too. Like, the prequels aren't perfect. They're really goofy. They're really silly. But to me, that's what I love about them. They're endlessly fun to quote. Sometimes it's hard to stay awake for all of them, but they're still definitely movies that I'm glad exist, and I love them even if I don't think they're amazing.
And I've said before, like the prequels and the sequels provide a really interesting contrast, because one is entirely like auteur driven and the other is entirely studio driven.
Right.
And we don't have to talk about the sequels this time. We'll save that for another 5 hour thing unto itself. But that to me is like just part of that intrigue process is, and this is why I asked you the other day what your favorite food was, and you said pizza. And the reason I asked you that is because it reminds me of Star Wars, in terms of there are so many different variations of pizza out there that it's more interesting to live in a world with all those variations than if there was just one pizza and it was good. Like, part of the fun is that there are so many different kinds of Star Wars. There are some movies that are just objectively good. There are movies that are entirely one dude fulfilling every wish he ever wrote in his sketchbook and notepad. There are movies that were designed specifically with the intention of how do we make the most money possible. Say what you will, it's interesting to see all of those different things exist in the same, like, 30 years of history of one universe,
Yeah.
which they do. It's all there. So,
And I want to just personally, I feel this way not just about the prequels, but about the sequels and pretty much all of Star Wars media. Which I know you do too.
yeah,
But that's going to
100%.
be interesting for anybody that watches these, because I know there's a lot of prequel fans out there that seem to think the prequels are better than the sequels as a whole. And when we get to the sequels, they're going to find that we don't entirely agree with that. There's one movie where I definitely agree with that. One of those sequels is
Oh, Jesus.
one of those sequels
No.
I'm gonna fucking rip apart. And it's not the one that you're thinking, audience. It's not. In fact, when we get to the one you're thinking, you might be surprised.
That'll be fun. That'll be a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, George Lucas, the last thing I'll say, the last thing I'll say is I'm very happy for George Lucas that he got to make these movies, because I feel like
Yeah.
he really loves them, and he, had to scratch and claw to get the first one together, and then he was able to make more, and then he spent 15 years waiting until he could do the other things that he wanted to do. And you know what? Even though I've probably said you're an idiot, a few times, or I probably said you don't know how to write human dialogue a few times, or whatever other mean things I've said, and I don't necessarily take them back, but you did make Star Wars, and I thank you for that. And as a way of like, not as an exchange, but like as a way of like reciprocating the gratitude for what you have given me, I will embrace these movies that are entirely your first drafts of cool ideas, with open arms, even as I continue to laugh at the writing and pacing
Yeah,
of some of them.
me as well. The prequels are
So,
some of my favorite things to watch, just to laugh and just to let myself embrace the silliness of a movie that I also loved as a kid. Even if I watch it in a different way than I did as a kid, there's still stuff to enjoy. Even the stuff is bad is very enjoyable.
and I would rather have. I mean, now that I've heard before about Lucas's plans for a sequel trilogy. and it does not sound very good. But I will say
No.
this: I can say with high confidence, I would much rather have like 10 more George Lucas Star Wars movies than one more Michael Bay Transformers movie. Or, that's my example.
Absolutely.
Pick a franchise that you think has just died a sad death. I know many people think Star Wars has died a sad death. I don't agree. I would rather do 10 more J.J. Abrams Star Wars than one more Michael Bay Transformers. There are many worse things out there. And so that's why I will not say anything else after this. Please say goodnight after this. My suggestion for the video title stands. The Star Wars prequels are mostly bad, and that's fine.
I think that's a good title, and I think that's a good place to end it. Well, thanks for watching this 3 hour and 46 minute, 27, and 28, 29 second video.
May the force be with you.
May the force be with you.